Off. Bring the board to order. We're going to. Do we have to start and do anything? Do we have to do anything? Mr. Where's the lawyers?
Take public comment on the public comment on the session.
We have a closed session ahead of us, and I'd like to take some public comment. Anybody interested in giving some thoughts about where we're going and what we're doing in closed session before we go? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and recess to closed session. Thank you. We'll be out in an hour. Oh, I thought you were going to talk LSU stuff.
On.
Is our greeter still out there? April, you out there?
She is.
Oh, it is? You ready to go?
Some of it's
I'll tell them.
people here, staff, my people's staff, maybe 2 dozen people.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's call this meeting to order. Open it up with report out of closed session.
Closed session was held and there's nothing to report.
Thank you, sir. Next thing we're going to do is a pledge of allegiance. Welcome, Adam. And that'll be led by our mayor, Ms. Peggy Breeden. Mayor Breeden. Please remain standing after the pledge for a moment of prayer, silence, and meditation.
Put your hand over your heart and repeat with me, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll start with a roll call. April?
Director Page,
Present.
Director Kaczynski,
Present.
Chairman Gleason,
Here.
Vice Chair Heyman,
Here.
Director Vallejo.
Present.
Thank you. Item number 5 is public comments. This time is reserved for the public to address the board about any matters not on the agenda. No action will be taken on non-agenda items unless authorized by law. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. Anybody wishing to make a presentation at the present time?
Good morning. Judy Decker. I have a question. I have read this document from the very beginning, all of the drafts and the final. And my comment to you is, how are you going to enforce it?
Thank you very much. Next.
Camille Anderson from Searles Valley Minerals. I just wanted to state that Searles Valley Minerals did submit written comments on the draft GSP to Don Zaniba before the deadline. April acknowledged receipt, but the comments appeared to have been lost in the ether and did not reach Heather at Stetson Engineers. They have been resent, and Heather stated that they will be considered and commented upon like the other public comments.
Thank you, Camille. Appreciate it. This is for items that are not on the agenda. So if you have something to say that's not on the agenda, now's the time to speak. Come on down.
Is this for public comment?
For things that are not on the agenda, not public comments for the GSP.
Groundwater. You talk about groundwater. We're going to have public comment for groundwater?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Anybody else? Move to item number 6, the consent agenda. We have 2 parts, A and B. I'm looking for a public comment on the consent agenda. Anybody wishing to make a comment on the consent agenda? Now's the time to do it. Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and bring it to the board for comment and a motion.
I move to accept the consent agenda.
We have a motion, looking for a second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item number 7. Wow. Okay, so item number 7, public hearing pursuant to the Water Code Section 10728.4 to consider adoption of the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Basin Groundwater Sustainability Plan. This is the big vote today, and what we're going to do is this. We're going to do a couple things different. We're going to shift chairs a couple times. We're going to do some stuff so we can have a better flow of information. I'm going to ask people. We've passed out a bunch of cards. If you have a comment, if you would like to make a comment, please submit your card. We'd love to hear from you, and looking forward to that. We'll call them out in no specific order. The cards are being collected here by April. You can pick a card up, Sam, at the entranceway. And if you forget, you don't manage a card, if something comes up and you want to speak, we're going to let you speak anyway. We're going to go through the public hearing. We're going to listen to a presentation about the GSP. We're going to go through a public hearing. We will close the public hearing. We'll bring it back to the board after a short recess. Well, the purpose of that recess is that we're trying to make sure that all your questions get answered. If there are questions that are asked and we don't have that readily available to answer, this short recess after will enable us to get those answers. And so after the recess, we'll come back. It'll be a 10 or 15-minute recess. We'll come back. We will answer your questions. And then once those questions are answered, the public hearing had already been closed. Will have already been closed. We'll go to the board comments. The board will make comments, and you'll see us deliberate on what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And then we're going to have a vote. And I will call the vote to pass the GSP. And we'll do it slow and methodical so everybody understands where we are and what we're doing and how things are going. So that's the general plan for item number 7. So let's begin by passing it off to Steve. I think you want to take the reins and run with this thing.
Is that okay, Don?
Okay. Where's Don?
He's over there now. I would look to the right side.
You're right, we're going to start with an introduction by...
I don't think that one works. You're going to have to use
Okay, yeah, the Water Resource Manager will kick off this agenda item.
Okay, we're good. Thank you, Meg. Thank you, Don. Well, gosh, welcome everybody. It's good to be back up here. We actually missed a meeting. Hi, Adam. We actually missed a meeting in December and called into it, so we haven't been up here for a while. We've had a couple of workshops and public joint meetings during the Attack of the Pack in the evening, so everybody could see what we were doing. But we haven't been up here for a while, so welcome everybody. It's good to be back up here. It's good to see all of you guys again. Real quick, I'm not going to do much talking today. We got unless it's in the responses to comments or questions, but not much. We got other stuff to be covered. I just wanted to say at the beginning, we all have come an awful long way on this. And I know there's going to be some comments about this later, but the involvement of the folks up here, both on the board and the staff, and you folks out there who provided input to us on this process to help educate us as the Water Resource Manager at Stetson has just totally been amazing. I mean, it is something I've never experienced in a lot of years of working on things like this. So it is amazing. And we've enjoyed it. We've enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it a lot. So I want to get that out of the way. The chairman talked about speaker cards, and the speaker cards will help us a lot because we set kind of a deadline to get written comments in. We've gotten some in after that, and Jeff's going to cover that. Speaker cards will help us to make sure we get everything addressed before we finalize the actual document that goes to DWR. So the speaker cards will help. If you don't have a speaker card, we've got people taking notes. We're still going to try and respond in the final GSP, but it will certainly help to have your thoughts and your name and what the issues were. So that will help. As the chairman mentioned, we're not going to be responding directly to the comments you make today. We're going to group a little bit. One of the intents, one of the intents of caucusing a little bit on the comments is one, just to make sure if there's something that's really important that needs to be responded to, that we do that. There may be responses that are generally it's in the GSP. We've already responded to it. It's all there. We want to keep that as brief as we can, but if there's something important, we do want to make sure that, based upon staff's input with legal counsel and staff, we want to make sure that we do actually respond to things if we determine that it needs to be a response here. But there will be written response in the final GSP, so you know that. What we're going to do is Jeff Helsley, you know Jeff from my office. Heather's here. You haven't seen Heather for a while, but we got her back, and I don't know. There's only certain people that may know this. Oh, well, I'm just going to say it anyway. Getting this GSP together as a final draft out was no easy task. You folks have a lot of comments that we have to address. And when we agreed to provide written responses, it was a lot of work. And frankly, I'm going to be honest, I stepped away from it and let Heather and Jeff kind of do it. Heather was the lead on it. And we had a deadline to get those out. She actually sent them to April, I think at 12:30 in the morning, Tuesday morning, at 12:30 in the morning. I was talking to her at 8 o'clock from home, and I was mad that she was still there, but she finally set it out at 12:30. So I was very mad at her the next day that she shouldn't have been there doing that, but she did. So Heather worked very hard on this. She's here. If there's a question that needs to be responded to, I'm going to rely on what I can respond to, but I'm going to use Jeff and Heather too. So Jeff is going to do a short PowerPoint, very short. When Jeff is done, we're going to turn it over to Special Counsel Jim Markman. Just a preliminary on that. A lot of comments we received, as you would expect, are legal in nature. So we want to make sure that we sort of properly characterize that, and Jim's going to do that. So you're off, Jeff. Thanks.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board, and public. Good to be here again. I'm just going to do to set a framework for our public comment, brief statements on the purpose and the contents of the GSP, so we all have a reference. Review the schedule of where we've been and where we need to go in the process. Give a summary of comments that we've received. Just give an overview of the changes that we made between the public review draft and the final draft that was just posted here in the last day, and then talk about the next steps. The RGSP provides the framework and roadmap for the basin management to reach the sustainability by 2040. There's a lot more work to be done as far as developing the projects and the detailed plans after this. This plan's tailored to consider the unique beneficial uses we have and the unique conditions we have in this basin. The plan is intended to be an adaptive management plan. As we get more information, or if the projects don't develop the way that we have intended, we will be able to adapt the plan and make changes to try and reach our goal of sustainability. This is just the table of contents, and in case during public comment we're referencing the different sections. Those are the sections that you've seen before. There's the schedule of the reviews that have been done on the chapters and the document itself, starting with TAC-PAC review of individual chapters as they became available. The last few chapters were not available until we had a complete draft. We had a joint PAC-TAC meeting on that, had a public review draft, a public workshop. The final went out for public draft for public review. And then our goal, if adopted, is to submit it to DWR by the end of this month, as the regulations require, and then we're hearing it could take up to 2 years, maybe more, for DWR to review this. As of January 9th, let me make sure this is up to date, we received 16 comment letters or emails from 14 individuals or groups. There are we broke it down into approximately 850 individual comments out of all those letters. We prepared a matrix of the comments with brief responses to them in almost all cases. That is included in the most recent draft of the GSP as an appendix. And that's Appendix 1F. And I've got an update. Since January the 9th, we've received now 8 comment letters, because we got 2 of them today, or at least we received them ourselves, 2 today, from 7 different individuals or groups. That included, and these will be added to our appendix, both all the comment letters and our matrix are in that appendix, and we will add these comment letters and their comments into our matrix with responses. We got one from Don Zadiba at the Water District, which we received on the 15th. It was a 1-page comment. Camille Anderson mentioned she tried to send us one earlier. We didn't receive it until the 15th. It was 10 pages. We will look at those. There was some good comments on some typos that we make sure we want to correct, and we'll consider all the comments. We had a comment letter from a coalition of the Clean Water Action, Clean Water Fund Union of Concerned Citizens, Concerned Scientists, Local Government Commission, Audubon, California, and the Nature Conservancy. We received on January 13th. That was 28 pages. The Friends of Inyos, we received a letter from them on January the 14th. That was 2 pages. The Lone Pine Paiute Shoshone Reservation sent us a letter, which we received on January the 14th, and it's a 1-page letter, and they had made a request to the general manager that we read that into the record for the board, so I'm going to read that letter. It's brief. It's dated January the 14th, 2020, addressed to the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority Board of Directors. The subject is the Draft Groundwater Sustainability Plan. Dear IWVGA, Lone Pine Paiute Shoshone Reservation, LPPSR, is in full support of Inyo County's position to oppose water exports to the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Basin. The Owens Valley Groundwater Basin is taxed from 100 years of water exports and the engineered loss of a 110 square mile lake. Every year there are more losses of springs and diverted surface water sources. Although the region does not meet California Department of Water Resources' strict definition under SGMA of a basin in distress, the LPPSR community has the historic knowledge of a much richer and healthier environment before exports began. We understand the fear and concerns of an uncertain future due to the depletion of a critical resource. However, the easiest option of taking water from neighboring basins is not an acceptable nor long-term solution. The valleys to the north of Indian Wells have little control over their water due to the continuing growth of Los Angeles. Let us learn from the past mistakes and find creative alternatives to unsustainable use of fresh water. Sincerely, Richard Button, Tribal Chairman, Lone Pine Paiute Shoshone Reservation. And it's a CC to Matt Kingsley. And today we received a letter from Mono County Community Development Department. It was 3 pages, and also from Inyo County. Yesterday we got the Mono County. Today we got the Inyo County, and it was 2 pages. So just a summary. The most common themes in our comments, and there were a number of topics, were legal positions or concerns, which we, as the Water Resource Manager, did not address. Process, policies, and procedures. There were comments on fundings, how to fund, what rates would be, what fees would be. There were requests for a lot of additional details. There were some comments regarding how to address environmental users and uses. There were comments on typos and minor corrections. We appreciate those. And there were some technical comments. We think we had the opportunity to clarify a couple of misconceptions out there we wanted to point out. One of them is that the proposed number 1 management action, that it does allow all pumping to continue to have a right to pump groundwater. There was also a perception that shallow well impacts in our mitigation plan, that we wouldn't address them for any wells drilled before February 1st of 2020. The intent is we wouldn't address wells. We would address wells that had impacts starting on February 1st, 2020. And then We did add some additional program details for the projects and management actions that they would be developed. Try to make it clear that there would be more details post-adoption, that there's a process to go through to do that. So an overview of the revisions we made. We corrected the typos and formatting. We did, in a number of places, make some changes just to make things clear, try to provide clarification. We've added the Appendix 1F, which is the matrix with the comments and responses and with the comment letters themselves. There's a checklist that DWR has for Sigma. We made some revisions, just updated that. Since we've added public comment, we could check that off and minor things like that. We got some comments on land use where we had a little bit more information clarifying land use authorities. The Nature Conservancy had provided us a letter on groundwater-dependent ecosystems, and it actually suggested a web-based tool that we could look at to look at impacts. We did use that web-based tool, and it compared the health of groundwater-dependent ecosystems between the year 1985 and the year 2018, and their tool said there was little to no change in the groundwater-dependent ecosystem health. There still are a lot of data gaps in that area, which the plan recognizes, and we had a little more discussion about that. Let's see. We had to make a correction. The historical pumping numbers that we had were correct based on the information we had. We just had an incorrect summary as far as percentage of the distribution of that pumping across the different groups of pumpers, so we made a correction to that. And then we had some data that we had put in calendar year. On a calendar year basis, Sigma requires that it be in a water year basis, October 1 to September 30th, so we made those changes. We had a little more clarification to the documentation on our groundwater model, and then some clarifications on footnotes for some other tables, and clarification on the Navy COSO funds. Let's see. So our next steps, assuming the board adopts the GSP, would be to prepare the responses and to the comments we've received since the January 14th, put those in the appendix. We do have some more additional minor corrections or clarifications, some based on the letters we've received in the last couple of days. We do want to make a correction to Table 3-11 on percentages of water by different groups. And then assemble and prepare our plan and get it submitted to DWR by January 31st, 2020. And that concludes my presentation. I believe Special Counsel Markman was going to have a general statement about some of the legal comments we got.
Yes, a couple of general statements. It has to be noted that there have been submitted some very, very long documents by attorneys representing interested pumpers in this basin. And so I want to read a response that we have generated, people representing the public entities and looking at this. Suffice it to say that this is a technical document, and a lot of those comments are about the process or broad general legal disagreement about the validity of a number of things, including approaches, water rights, which aren't in front of the board anyway. And so we're not responding to those. So nobody should be looking for written responses, and nobody should be looking for a legal argument here that eats up a lot of time, maybe hours today, trying to respond back and forth on those legal arguments. So I wanted to make that clear. There is, this is the agreed joint statement by the lawyers working for the public entities represented on this board. The Water Resources Manager has referred to legal counsel, legal comments received in connection with public comments to the GSP. We have advised the JPA as follows. The GSP is a technical document that describes the physical conditions of the basin, sets out the process for managing adverse impacts. It is not intended as a determination of water rights of pumpers in the basin. It also is not a legal brief. We have advised the JPA that water used or contemplated to be used by the federal government in connection with the operation of the China Lake Naval Weapons Test Center is beyond the jurisdiction of the JPA's regulatory authority. Under the process outlined by the GSP, the JPA will make a technical determination of the potential scope of this water use. The remaining water, if any, will be available for all water users subject to allocation. The JPA will then set the fees necessary to replenish the water used beyond the safe yield by all users except the Navy. The legal comments we have reviewed are beyond the scope of this portion of the GSP process. Many of these comments present an analysis of the JPA's statutory authority or the interaction between state and federal law. Other legal issues concern objections to actions that the JPA has yet to take. Finally, several comments are based on the false presumption that the JPA is making a determination regarding water rights. Each of these legal comments is beyond the scope of the GSP currently before the JPA board. While the JPA has no desire to curtail responses to the GSP, we have advised that responding to these legal arguments is not productive to the current GSP adoption. And then there's one specific issue that came to my attention in the last few weeks, but evidently has been raised several times. And we have, and this may be raised again today orally, but basically the observation or objection is that this JPA ought to be seeking state reimbursement for all the costs of processing this document and implementation of SGMA because the state has mandated the process on the local agencies. And so there's a research memo that was done for me that is actually in the record now. It's part of the GSP, but there are three answers to that. The first answer, which isn't very convincing, I'll admit, but it's still raised all the time, is that when the legislature adopted SGMA, they had part of the bill which adopted it say, you're not going to get your money back for this because this is not something that generates mandated costs as defined in the Constitution. So they said that. But the fact is it's probably true for two reasons. The first reason is that nobody has to do this. This is not mandated on the local agencies. It is asked the local agencies do this to solve their problem locally, and there's a certain period of time you get to do it, but you don't have to do it, and the people on this JPA, all of them or none of them to have to stay on, they're doing that by their exercise of their discretion. So it's not a mandate. If this isn't done locally, it may be done by DWR, but it's not legally necessary for a county, a city, or a district to do this. And the second reason why it's not considered a mandated cost is that the statute gives you fundraising authority by authorizing the assessments that have been discussed many, many times here. So we've concluded that this is not, in fact, this is, I guess, been stated many times before, this is not the kind of legislation where we could seek to be reimbursed for the costs from the state. And that's pretty much all we have to say.
Thank you, Jim and Jeff. I think with that, I think we're ready to go back to the chairperson, Chairman,
sir.
and look at opening the hearing for public comment.
Okay, so we're going to open up for public comment. Looking forward to hearing from you. Remember that after, how many people, could you raise your hand, how many people want to say something during public comments, just so I get an idea? Okay, if you could please be concise and as quick as you can. That'd be great. That'd help us out because we want to have a flow to this meeting.
Chair Gleason, you may want to mention several people came in late to fill out a comment card.
Good idea.
Okay.
There's a comment card. If you came in late and did not get a comment card, if you'd like to come down, April's got some comment cards here that you can write your name on, and if you want, and you can make comments, and that way we can take those comments in order. We'll call your name, and you can make your comment in order. At the end of that, we'll ask everybody and anybody to come up and speak. Please remember that after the public hearing, the process is we're going to close the public hearing, and then we're going to have a recess. So we can go back and figure out what was said, if there's any adjustments we need to make, and that recess will last about 10 to 15 minutes, and at which time we'll come back. We'll give the opportunity for the Water Resource Manager to answer all the comments and questions that were asked during the public hearing, And then we'll end that phase, and we'll go into board member comments, and you can watch us deliberate and make a decision on how this is all going to happen. So, and once again, if you haven't filled out a blue card, and you want to fill out a blue card, you want to say something, please come down and do it. If not, we'll take your comments afterwards. April will run this show, so if you'd call out the names one at a time and bring people down. Thank you.
Elizabeth Esposito, representing Mojave Pistachios, LLC, and Nugent Family Trust.
And these names are not in any specific order. They're randomly selected and just brought out.
And then, just one moment. Up next, we have Shirley Kirkpatrick. So I'll just call the next person, so that way we can keep it moving.
Good morning. My name is Elizabeth Esposito. I'm with Brownstein Hyatt Farber Schreck, and we represent Mojave Pistachios LLC and the Nugent Family Trust. We'd like to refer the board to our January 8th comment letter, which more fully identifies our concerns with the plan and suggests remedies for the defects we identify. But today I'll discuss 3 key issues. And the first is that Plan Management Action Number 1 runs contrary to several foundational constitutional principles. By denying allocations to agricultural users, the plan would take fully vested overlying water rights and make them available for use by others without just compensation. Although the plan does include the fallowing program, the payment under that program is inadequate to compensate participants for their investments. For example, where the plan estimates that $9 million will be sufficient to fund the program, Mojave alone has invested more than $25 million in the basin. Additionally, excluding agricultural users from the annual pumping allocation plan raises issues because it requires them to pay the majority of augmentation fees. And in doing so, requires agricultural users and others excluded from the allocation plan to subsidize bringing imported water into the basin, a benefit which will be enjoyed by all water users. And this runs afoul of the constitutional requirement that fees must bear a reasonable relationship to the payor's burdens on or benefits received from the governmental activity. The plan also raises due process concerns because it fails to establish a causal connection between agricultural pumping on the one hand and avoidable undesirable results that's necessary to support the plan's draconian approach, which would essentially eviscerate agriculture in the Indian Wells Valley. The second issue I'd like to highlight is that Management Action Number 1 contravenes SGMA's express prohibition on determining or altering common law water rights. And that's because the plan in Section 5 demonstrates that this body would be determining which users hold, quote, inferior rights and which users hold, quote, superior rights. The plan also demonstrates that the board would then determine allocations based on these determinations of water rights, which are inconsistent with common law principles. Instead, we ask that allocations be granted to all users in the valley, that they be proportional to each user's existing and anticipated future water uses, that they take in account each user's investments in the valley, and that they allow for ramp down over SGMA's 20-year horizon. Also, we ask that allocations take into account the massive amount of water that is in storage in the basin. Last, we note that the plan should be updated to reflect the best available scientific information, which demonstrates that there is substantially more water available in storage in the basin, substantially more recharge to the basin, and substantially fewer undesirable results than is acknowledged in the plan. We urge the board to address these issues and to adopt a plan that respects private property rights, acknowledges the large amount of water in storage in the basin, and achieves the constitutional mandate to achieve reasonable and beneficial use of water. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was inadvertent. But what did that buzzer go off?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Let's do that. I want to let people speak.
Okay.
Thank you.
But please be concise. Next up.
Shirley Kirkpatrick.
Hi. As I'm speaking right now, in the last 15 days, about 3.3 million people had their water flushed into the ocean. And why I'm bringing this up is because in September of 2014, Governor Brown signed into law the Sustainability Act. Now, this relates to where we're at today. I don't believe that we should follow this mandate because this was signed into law. I remember years ago when I read that, I said, we're going to be in trouble. We're going to face a crisis that we didn't create. There's not a water problem. So if the water wasn't being flushed out into the ocean, we would not have to be coming up with this plan. Now, in Ridgecrest, we're going to have to pay for something that I don't believe we should have to pay for. And basically, that's why I'm, as a private citizen, coming up to you today, voicing my concerns with the bad law that we're going to have to pay for. Thank you.
I have Sophia Merck, and next would be Jean Schneider. Pat Ferris will be after Sophia.
My name is Sophia Merck. I've just got a few points to say. I believe that the time constraint over the holidays, it was too short for the public to review this document. A lot of us could not download it, and it was very difficult to do it over the holidays. I think that you should extend it at least another 15 days. The elevation for the area in the Indian Wells Valley that is being looked at should have been established at the crest of the Sierra Nevada, not where the line is shown. Also, earthquake activity and sublimation of water lenses in the valley was never truly explored in depth in this book. Inyo County and San Bernardino County, they went to the full head. I mean, what they did was they established no groundwater pumping as soon as they could in this area. However, Kern County continued to process well permits without knowing all the facts. So I think Kern County should have done a better job in regards to that. Little consideration was given to some of the seeps and the springs that we do have in this area. And let's see. I have one more. And I believe that the plan is not equitable. A lot of the farmers came here back in the 60s and 70s. And yes, we do have some new farmers, but they all bought their property. And I don't feel that this GSA board is considering the amount of money, effort, and time. Some of these farmers have been in this community over 50 years. And I don't think that this GSA is really considering that fact. Thank you.
After Pat will be Don Decker.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I have brought this up before, and I still have concerns about what appears to be misrepresentation on the decline in the water table in this basin. I have this recent message from Kern County Water Agency staff. It says they measure the wells in Indian Wells Valley twice a year, in March and October. The average decline in IWV over the entire basin has generally been 1/2 foot per year, with some areas having a slightly larger decline, while other areas show a leveling off. However, she mentions that the water measurements have not been examined and detailed post the 7.1 magnitude earthquake. But this is something that concerns me. Agency staff continues to provide all water level data to Stetson engineers for inclusion in the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority data management system, as well as reporting levels to the California statewide groundwater elevation monitoring CASGEM. I just have I can't understand the why we would try to be making things look worse than they are, with the continual reference to 1 to 1.5 foot decline in the basin, when also the Indian Wells Valley Water District and previous reports have stated that the decline is 6 inches. Also, in the Kern and the China Lake environmental impact draft, or in the report, says that that's their information that they document, that is 6 inches a decline in the basin. So I know this is not a question and answer forum presently, but I would please like to know and hope you can get, I think the public deserves an answer as to why we continually put out there 1 to 1.5 feet. And often people say, I don't think this has come from Mr. Johnson, but the misrepresentation, according to the data that we have reported, and these people have been measuring for a long time, unless they're, I don't want to question motives, except I kind of do. Is this to target agriculture? Why would we consist? I want to tell you, and when this the first time I heard this report was at the meeting when the only meeting that the Board of Supervisors were here. I think that was maybe back 2014, and the Board of Supervisors met here, and that report was given from the Kern County Water Agency and from the Water District. And Mick, you may not remember this, but you had to come back twice to give that report, because I think it was probably a surprise to you. It was only 6 inches. And I'm thinking about these supervisors from the other side of the mountain, and they have 45 to 50 feet decline, and they're thinking, you think you have a problem? I think this needs to be clarified, and I hope that we can hear some clarification on this matter. Thank you.
After Dawn will be West Katzenstein.
I'm Don Decker. I am a member of the TAC, and I'm actually here more for my own self, as the hard work that went into this is quite apparent, and I think it's appropriate to really give Stetson engineers the credit that they deserve. I think also something that isn't totally obvious is the thousands, literally, of hours of professional time that went into this from the TAC members that were very active and from the PAC members who were very active. There's literally thousands of professional hours that were devoted to this. The plan as it exists is obviously an outline. It's more than that, but there's a huge amount of detail that isn't there yet. The implementation portion, for example, is very incomplete. Whether or not the plan can ultimately work remains to be seen. The legal challenges that are already in place and the ones yet to come are obviously of great concern to all of us who are trying to actually make some headway in regards to our serious overdraft. One thing that the plan is still saddled with is the conflict of interest that the JPA inherently brings to bear. The various parties that are in the joint effort are now intended to solve an overdraft problem that was largely ignored by those very agencies for all these many decades. The conflict of interest aspect has some really apparent components that I'll bring one of them to your attention. It's nothing new, of course, but the issue of growth in the present time, before we actually have even started the sustainability effort, what we're actually doing is taking water that will go to these new projects. Some of the projects that are connected with Navy effort are entirely appropriate. There are other projects, though, that are on the table that most certainly have no benefit to the Navy whatsoever. That water that will be used in those projects is coming straight away from the existing citizens. There's no other way to describe it. The 1% that's nominally in the plan for growth, a 1% increase per year for growth across the various entities that might actually have growth, is actually a compound percentage. And it's very deceiving. This is the old compound interest effect. And 1% by 2035, which is where we are hopefully going to have imported water, amounts to actually a 16% increase in water consumption based on just the simple arithmetic. If we carry that to 2040, it becomes 22%. It's a huge effect, actually. The 1%, when you write it down, seems benign, but it's far from it. And the water that will be used is coming right out of storage, and we're already seeing the consequences of that decline, the increase in TDS in many wells, and it will continue and get worse. I'm not going to go into any of that detail, but the issue of growth is something this board is going to have to address directly. It cannot be ignored, and in the mode that we're in right now, I'm submitting to you that any growth that does occur has got to be identified as something important to this basin, in particular to the Navy. Thank you.
After West will be Tom Mulvihill.
Wes Katzenstein speaking for myself. I'd like to second the comments that Dr. Decker made concerning the effort that's gone into this, GSP as it stands, the effort that's gone into the technical basis for this. And I'm not a lawyer, but I do like the rationale for the priorities and allocation. I believe that if you were to look at the most reasonable use of water and the least wasteful use of water as required by the Constitution, you're going to find that providing water to citizens to maintain their homes, their jobs, providing water to the Navy to maintain its jobs and infrastructure is the best and most reasonable use of that water. If you move down that list of reasonable uses, you'll find that water used for industrial purposes will indeed help people keep their homes and jobs and protect that infrastructure, but a fair amount of that water is not used directly for that. And then following the reasonable use of water, the least reasonable use would be agriculture, because per acre foot of water used, it provides very few jobs. And if you compare the infrastructure protected per acre foot of water used, you compare that amount of investment by agriculture to that people have invested in their homes, the businesses have invested, that the Navy has invested, that Sears Valley Mineral has invested, If you wanted to do an investment comparison, you need to do a per acre foot comparison, and you're going to find, I think, that from that point of view, the most reasonable use of water is to support infrastructure, to support homes, to support people's jobs, and not to water crops. If you want to value the farmer's land, you probably should consider what that land would be worth if we don't solve the problem. It should be subjected to the same risks as every homeowner in this basin if you want to value property. As far as avoiding wasteful use of water, I submit that any water that's used for agriculture on crops that will never mature is wasteful use of water. And I want to say just a few words about the value of water and storage. I did, as some of you know, I did what might be considered an absurd analysis. But my question was, what does it cost to replace that water today? If we offer 41,000 acre feet for agriculture, what is that water worth today? And I made a few phone calls. If you had to replace that water today, you would haul that water. So I finally found a gentleman in, I think it was Wyoming, would talk to me. That water is worth billions of dollars if you had to haul it today, and that's the only way you could bring that water in today. He said, by the way, he would not be allowed to export water. I talked to a lady in Acton who hauls water. She says she would not be allowed to export water to this basin. The answer is the same. That water is worth billions of dollars. So just bear that in mind as you move forward. And if you offer that water, be sure that we get our money's worth for it. I think those are the main points that I wanted to make. I like the approach taken. One last comment, I think it is very important that we consider the possibility in the plan that we may not be successful at importing water. And I recognize some of that language has been put in the plan now. But we will not, by arguing about this, or having a boxing match out in the hallway, we're not going to decide right now whether we're going to be successful at importing water or not. I hope we are successful. We need to give it our best shot. But the plan needs to have a branch point in it that says if we're not successful, what do we do then? Anyway, thank you all for your efforts. Have a good day.
After Tom will be Chuck Griffin.
I just want to remind everybody, thank you very much for your efforts at being concise and to the point. Thank you.
Thank you for producing a groundwater sustainability plan that confronts the conditions of groundwater in this valley. The basin setting that I read in this plan, that basin setting description admits that this basin has been in overdraft since 1960 and before, thereby reducing groundwater and storage and allowing chronic lowering of groundwater levels. From that time on, use of water that was not the highest priority became unreasonable use. Water use, although beneficial under water law, becomes unreasonable use when it endangers the sustainability of the valley's residents, health, and safety. While there remains a large quantity of groundwater, we do not know how much of this is potable water. As Randy Bassett, the geochemist on the AB 303 study, told me, and I remember this so well, you have a lot of groundwater in storage, but you have been pumping the good water. And a lot of what remains is brackish. This plan remains incomplete until it addresses the allocation of the 7,650 acre feet of natural recharge. The plan does acknowledge that the establishment of policy in this state that the use of water for domestic purposes is the highest use of water, and that the highest beneficial use of water in the Indian Wells Valley groundwater basin is for domestic purposes, including human consumption, cooking, and sanitary uses. Thank you. Thank you for putting that in the plan. But since the plan has not yet made an allocation of natural recharge for the highest use, the domestic users of this valley are forced to continue to monitor and closely watch your progress to set annual pumping allocations, which you have committed to do at your June 2020 meeting. Number 2, the GSP management plan. It is frightening that it allows further depletion of our good water by unreasonable uses such as outdoor irrigation, both residential and agricultural. Okay, for the transient pool as well as additional 4,500 acre feet per year identified as the amount that's going to become an augmentation amount, and this is allowed in the plan for an unknown period of time. It's justified based on the promise of imported water. Well, that promise is a little bit hollow, because the plan does not identify the source that you have secured, and it does not have identified that you have agreement of other agencies, that you have secured the necessary environmental, regulatory, and political approvals, or the financing to bring imported water here. If this valley succeeds in finding the source of imported water, then we are being placed, all of us, the residents of this valley, in a very difficult position of outbidding all the many other overdrafted basins in California. Importation at best should not be in the plan until we have a source. At worst, it should have a drop-dead date. And this is maybe a little bit beyond worse. The plan should have a set date by which time, if a reliable source of water for importation is not contractually secured, pumping will be limited to natural recharge. After that date, the alternative plan of limiting water production to sustainable recharge becomes, in my opinion, the only reasonable alternative. One more comment, and I'll be gone, at least from this podium. Comment on Project 1, Option 2, a recharge project near the Inyo Kern Airport. Groundwater moves slowly through the aquifer. You have not explained when and if that recharged water will timely reach pumping areas to mitigate the effects of declining water levels. It's plausible that the water brought in for recharge would be better used by being served to users conjunctively with an in-valley water bank. This would be more costly, I suspect, I'm quite confident, than what is proposed in the plan, and I know the plan has plenty of costs already, but it would better promote sustainability as a way of using imported water. Thank you.
After Chuck will be Derek Hoffman.
Hi, good morning, Chuck Griffin. I'll probably get a little rattled because I didn't write anything down, but I have quite a bit going through my mind, but I didn't know how I was going to start, but I guess I know now. We all stood up at the beginning of this meeting, and Ms. Breeden led us in the Pledge of Allegiance. And in that Pledge of Allegiance, we all said justice for all. And I'm asking you 5 board members up there, I know I was on a board, and I served on a board for a short time, and a 5-0 vote's important, but I want each one of you to please be individuals today and consider justice for all in this room, because that's what's important, is justice for all. Because that's what we stand on in America. We are American citizens. This plan, as I don't oppose Sigma, and I understand what's going on. I've took classes, I've been to seminars. I understand Sigma very well, and I'd appreciate it, Mr. Kaczynski, if you didn't roll your eyes at me. I don't appreciate that. I'm standing here trying to talk, so I disrespect that very much. But anyway, what I'm asking you guys is to please individually think about what's going on. We've designed a plan. I've came up to this podium several times, and I've asked Steve Johnson, I said, we've got water in other areas of this basin. This plan details importing water at some point in time, finding that water source at some cost, and I read the report, and it's in excess of $100 million is the one, the one I was reading, for the infrastructure, getting the water and everything here. We have solutions in this valley that are not being considered, and I don't understand why those were not addressed. We have areas of this basin that have higher water levels, which tells us we have subbasins that we could pull from that are not being pulled from. Mr. St. Amand, when he ran for the water district, he talked about building dams and diversion things on the Navy property and using that water, which could be supplemented. That's not in there. We didn't talk about any of that stuff. We talked about importing water that's going to cost the ratepayers and the people in this valley a ton of money that we cannot afford. I've been here my whole life, 50 years, and I have a business here, and this is affecting everybody. It's going to affect more. What I want to talk about with justice, I listened to the Water District meeting the other night on TV, and Searles Valley was brought up. And Ron said that this isn't affecting Searles Valley. You know, well, it did not say affected, I guess. Your thing was we're not going to close Searles Valley. But it already has led to Searles Valley denying requests for new business. And that's what I'm afraid is going to happen. And Mr. Page, I'm asking you as the supervisor of San Bernardino County to think about that. Do you not want any more business? Are we trying to stop the growth? Because that's what I'm afraid is going to happen. There was a letter issued for a will serve for a new industrial business. That letter, since this plan has been in effect, has been withdrawn because Searles Valley cannot provide water to that new business. So there are going to be changes. It is going to affect residents in Trona, and that trickles down to here. So everything we do has a trickle-down effect, and it affects every single business in this town. My business depends on growth. So are we going to end growth? I have to have growth in order to work. And without that, we don't survive. I want to talk a little bit about Sigma. Reading through this plan, the allocations that are given to the farmers in Searles Valley, I disagree with that. The classes that I attended, and right in Sigma, it states that it does not affect water rights. Mr. Markman said we're not here to address water rights. That's not what this is about. Well, that's what I feel you guys are doing, is taking away the water rights of private citizens that own that property. Sigma was designed to, in my understanding, to be a fair negotiation between all of the users in this basin. Well, we see right now it's not fair if we have people objecting that are the large users. What I believe should have happened, which I've stated since day one, was we needed to be working with the farmers in order to buy them out. I do agree that maybe that is the solution, but I don't believe closing them and running them out of business is right. I don't think Mr. Heyman would want somebody to come in and say, no more chiropractors, we're running you out. I sure wouldn't want somebody to come in and say, no more construction equipment, which the state's essentially trying to do right now with air pollution. So that's what I believe is happening. I believe it's about working together. And I'm in a hurry, but I want to talk about something. Working together means sitting down at a table, having a talk, and saying, this is what we want to do. And I may offend the Meads, but I'm going to use their name. They've been in business here since 1971. And they are no longer involved in farming, and I've been close friends with them my whole life. But they went to the Water District on several occasions. Mr. Mulvihill just said, we don't have, this has been no critical overdraft. Well, Mr. Mulvihill was the district manager when their farm, Brown Road Farming, which was bought by Meadowbrook, was offered to the district first and said, would you like to purchase this? We're going to sell it. We'll make the terms nice for you. Because we're concerned if you feel there's a water problem, no, it's okay, farm. That's negotiation. Later on, let's fast forward a few years, they had some property, 360 acres or so, maybe a little more than that. They approached the district and said, would you guys like to purchase this property before we have somebody interested in agriculture that would like to purchase it? That was Mojave Pistachios. No, sell it. So they made the efforts, and agriculture stepped in and said, if there's a problem, let's address it. Here, you guys buy this property. We'll step away. That didn't happen. So now we're at this solution where they're being forced to leave and lose everything they had for no reason, and I completely disagree with that. And then Mojave Pistachio comes in. They've been a great neighbor. They support the community. Meadowbrook supports the community. Searles Valley supports the community. You see their name at every place you go. They're a banner for our kids, for the earthquakes, for everything. All of those businesses participate. And they did it long before Sigma was around. They were still donating and trying to help the citizens of this valley. And I think we're just shooting them right in the foot. And I completely disagree with that. But Mojave Pistachios came into town. They bought property, drilled a perfectly great performing water well that would have been a great production well for the water district. They approached the water district and said, hey, we bought this property. It's on the south side of Inyokern Road. We would like to do a land trade with you, and we'll take the Neal Ranch, which the district bought many years ago, and we won't farm it, and we'll do a no farming agreement, and you guys have a perfectly good well. The district did that. So now they own a piece of property that the district owned, and it eliminated a dust problem and a weed abatement problem to make it into a natural little area that's natural, that's not farmed. So they've made efforts, and that's what I'm asking you guys. Why do we not want to sit down and negotiate with them and just have a nice negotiation instead of leading to all this litigation? It's going to be ugly. And I respect you guys, and I hope that you guys will think about this, and I appreciate your time.
After Derek will be Camille Anderson.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Derek Hoffman, attorney for Meadowbrook. I want to thank Mr. Chairman for eliminating the buzzer today, but I will make an effort to keep my comments brief and concise. We understand that it's not easy or simple to develop a GSP. Many basins are going through this process, and it is a challenge. It's also, however, imperative that the Groundwater Authority comply with SGMA, DWR regulations, and best management practices, and of course, California common law for water rights in developing and implementing a GSP. Meadowbrook submitted a letter providing extensive comments on the December 2019 public review draft GSP. And I have a copy of that letter here today that I'm going to also submit into the record. Eddie Teasdale of Ludorf and Scalmanini, consulting engineers, Meadowbrook's consulting hydrogeologist, and TAC representative also submitted a letter, a detailed comment letter, and I have a copy of that letter as well that I'll also submit today into the record. The final GSP was presented to the public and presumably to this board only one day prior to today's adoption hearing. This clearly falls short of SGMA's stakeholder engagement requirements. Substantively, the final draft GSP does not meaningfully respond to Meadowbrook's comments. Instead, GSP Appendix F merely acknowledges, in most instances, that the comments were received. And I have a third letter dated today's date that I'll also submit into the record, memorializing that. The comments that have been submitted by Meadowbrook and other large stakeholders raise significant technical, policy, and legal issues with the GSP and the GSP development process. All of those issues must be addressed before adopting a GSP. Now, given today's very limited public comment opportunity, I'll briefly summarize the main points in Meadowbrook's letters and direct you to those letters specifically for the details. First, Meadowbrook Dairy is a family farm founded in 1918. It has produced groundwater for reasonable and beneficial purposes on its overlying land in this basin for decades and holds vested water rights. Meadowbrook has long endeavored to participate in achieving long-term basin sustainability. This included considering a reasonable and substantial reduction in its groundwater production to satisfy a fair, equitable, and legally and technically supportable GSP. Instead, the GSP unlawfully targets Meadowbrook and other agricultural users to be removed or unlawfully taxed in order to accommodate other chosen groundwater users. Next, the GSP sustainable management criteria and projects and management actions are biased and are not supported by the best available science and information. Instead, they are based upon preconceived modeling scenarios designed to eliminate agriculture that were never vetted by or revealed in detail to the TAC, the PAC, or the public. In fact, the Groundwater Authority developed the modeling scenarios, projects, and management actions before developing the sustainable management criteria. And this is the opposite of what is required by SGMA, the DWR regulations, and the best management practices. As just one example, the GSP document shows that groundwater levels at the monitoring site nearest Meadowbrook is already achieving the measurable objective and has for several years. The GSP acknowledges major data gaps on water quality for the area and for groundwater and storage. SGMA requires that projects and management actions be designed to avoid specific, undesirable, defined results. Specific, defined, undesirable results at each representative monitoring site. The GSP fails to explain or justify why Meadowbrook should be potentially stripped of its right to produce groundwater from the native yield in the absence of legally and technically supported sustainable management criteria. As detailed in Meadowbrook's comment letters, the GSP fails to satisfy many of the DWR regulations, and unless appropriately amended, the GSP should not be approved by DWR, nor is it likely to be. If implemented, the GSP, and particularly Management Action Number 1, would result in stripping Meadowbrook's water rights without due process and just compensation. And we submitted evidence with our letter indicating that 2 of the big 3 voting members of the Groundwater Authority appear to have predetermined the groundwater allocation outcomes, specifically in the Navy's favor, and based upon ideas that are not consistent with California water rights law and principles. Any such predetermination would violate Meadowbrook's right to due process. So in conclusion, Meadowbrook urges this board to address Meadowbrook's comments and all other GSP deficiencies before adopting or implementing a GSP. No one will benefit from a deficient GSP that drives this valley into State Water Board intervention or ignites unnecessary litigation. Finally, Meadowbrook respectfully urges the Groundwater Authority to truly engage the PAC, TAC, and stakeholders to develop appropriate sustainable management criteria, projects, and management actions, and to properly amend the GSP prior to adoption or implementation. Thank you for your time and consideration. And I'll give these letters to the clerk for the record today.
After Camille will be Judy Decker.
This is just a general overview of comments, which actually have been submitted. The Indian Wells Valley groundwater basin is in critical overdraft and is mandated by the SGMA legislation to develop a plan to gain sustainability by 2040. We acknowledge that this is a large undertaking and will involve everyone in the Indian Wells Valley as well as Searles Valley. Unfortunately, critical details of the numerous projects are lacking. The plan defers stating decisions and details of the main management action that affects the viability of various entities until after the adoption of the plan by the GA and submission of the plan to the DWR. There are no cost-benefit analyses or prioritization of projects based on highest benefits with the least amount of costs to mitigate critical overdraft. The timetables are optimistic, the financial burdens are understated, and the lack of concrete funding mechanisms is concerning. We are disappointed that this draft plan only provides broad goals and outlines of the many projects that the GA deems are necessary to achieve sustainability.
After Judy will be Mallory Boyd.
Good afternoon. I have one nitpicky thing. It's something that I have had in every one of my written comments since the drafts have come out. Under TAC membership, you have forgotten small agriculture. Don Quist has come to all the meetings, so I would like you to review that and add small agriculture to your TAC list of membership. There are other many small items which have been pointed out to you, and I'm not going to go into them. You have before you a huge issue, and it's been brought up by several different people, several different ways. You have been given the end result of ignoring a problem that was put here, if you will, by nature. This is a desert. We have a desert climate. we have a desert soil, and we have a desert water supply. We cannot control the water supply in the sense of additional recharge. The longer this goes on, the less water will be available for future generations. There have been, this basin has been studied extensively for years. The first report that talked about not having enough water was written 106 years ago. 106 years ago. Until Sigma came along, no one did anything about the checking account, if you will, which is we are using, no matter if we're agriculture, the guy that lives down the street, Searles Valley Minerals, or whoever, we are using more water than nature is returning to us. We are depleting our savings account. In order for there to be a future here, the problem has to be solved. You have an unenviable job. Stetson's engineers have written thousands of words. It is unfortunate to hear that it's going to take DWR up to 2 years to approve the plan or not approve the plan. I think the criticisms that have been given to you, for the most part, are valid criticisms that need to be examined. I think you need to right away, right after you submit the plan, you need to start an amendment process. And I'll give you a for instance there. Maybe this has been discussed privately and the public doesn't know about it, and that's quite fine. But the recycled water, for instance, one use of that recycled water would be, in fact, to send it to Trona. It would fulfill many of their needs, not their need for potable water, of course, but you need to put that down as something to look into. There are other issues that need to be looked into. And as far as the farming goes, the agriculture, I think they have some valid complaints. Personally, I do not think agriculture belongs in the desert. But there again, you guys are stuck with the decisions made in the past and the present by your agencies. And an issue that you individually need to take back to your agencies is a re-examination of land use. Thank you.
Finally, am I the last? So I got all afternoon. Awesome. Mallory Boyd, I guess I'm representing myself here in this short comment. I too, as many in the room, have been through this plan several times, and I want to commend all of us who have been participating in this development. I know the plan is not perfect. We don't have time to make it perfect. We do have time in the future, though, to make amendments. I applaud or foot stomp Judy's comment about defining somehow that we're going to improve the GSP with time, and I think the 5-year updates is, or 5-year review is probably not frequent enough. One of the areas specifically, though, in the current GSP that I think we need to spend more time on, notwithstanding the comments that have already been mentioned about other things that need to be addressed, I'm not trying to downplay those, but the management actions section has a few, I think, areas that need to be enhanced. And one is how we're using the water that we have. There's a section that talks about reducing losses, through evaporation, perhaps in the future wastewater treatment facility, maybe being closed cycle, covered, whatever, those types of things. But I think we've overemphasized in that section recycled water for landscaping. I'd like to foot stomp that we need to figure out the tertiary treatment of water so that we have a perpetual renewal of water that we've used and not just put it out in landscaping, which will result in evaporation, a net loss over time. I know it's expensive, but I think in the long term, doing tertiary treatment and reuse of our water will pay back in big dividends. I don't know it'll be enough I know it won't be enough to replace what we anticipate needing to import, but it will certainly be a step in the right direction. I want to publicly applaud Peggy's efforts, even though it's replacing the circular grass area out here in the front of City Hall as a step towards reducing. I know it's a small step, but it's a step towards reducing landscaping use within the community. We need to do a lot more of that. I think we need to set examples for the public to follow, both in the county and the city, as part of that, as those management actions as well. Emphasizing those, I think, would be very important to us. I would, as an example, I think when you leave this meeting and you drive through the community, take a look around, the lush areas that we have in our city and our neighboring counties. There's a lot of water being used right now for the benefit of landscaping that could be better put to use for these other future endeavors that the valley is seeking. That's all I have. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Okay, what I'd like to do is we've expleted all the cards. They're all gone. We've deleted all the cards. People have signed the cards. So thank you very much. It's been very, very significant, your contributions, and appreciate them. And I'm sure there are other by the ways we'd like to offer to us, and now's a chance to do that. So please feel free to come down if you have comments you'd like to make and you haven't made yet. Please feel free to make those. Mike, to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Gleason. Just as a point that this is...
Please state your name.
I'm sorry.
Please state your name, sir.
Mike Neal. This information is readily available, and in fact, it's on page Executive Summary number 33 in the report. And I think that this is probably what most of the people in this valley, and the only thing they're really interested in, that's what's going to cost them. Now, it's delineated, and I'll just give you the top-end numbers because I fully believe that we're going to go to top-end or beyond what's even in this report. I believe some of these costs have actually gone up since the initial draft. So the engineering cost, you got $46 million. The implementation capital cost, you got $309 million. Now, those need to be amortized possibly over 30 years. Take your best guess that we're going to get real lucky and get that at a 2% interest to fund that. And then, of course, your annual cost of $9 million, wait a minute, I'm just looking through my glasses. There's $9.5 million. That's going to happen every single year. So I double-checked my calcs with a friend of mine's, and we came out really close to the same numbers. And you want to take the average hit on that. That's only going to be $2,000 a year for every user in the water district. Possibly a little less than that. Just like to remind this board of people who maybe weren't around, weren't paying attention. A few years back when we had the whole thing about had to go to mandatory recycled trash use, people were screaming and yelling and getting very, very upset because the cost of their trash service was going to go up $30 every 2 months. Imagine how people are going to feel when they finally find out that they have to pay $1,000 or more per year extra to get water through their tap. It is not going to be pretty, and I'm not even going to conjecture about the ramifications of all that. Another point that I've made and actually is in the comments, and I got a 2-page basic response. Most of these appear to be your basic Google search of case law and how to respond to old Mike Neal's assertions here about how the state should fund these mandates. Since you wanted me to be concise, it's going to appear that I'm being a little abrupt, but it'll save me from taking a lot of time to explain here. But I've made some notes looking through this, and we got, of course, your usual citation of case law, County of Fresno versus State of California, about that the costs are not mandated by the state, and it says that this Commission on State Mandate shall not find costs mandated if the authority has to levy service charges, fees, or assessments to pay for this, and claiming that supposedly if these were not intended to reach beyond taxation, or that if you're not going to get the money solely from tax revenues, that somehow all of a sudden becomes not a mandated thing that the state might have to pay for. My response to that is baloney. I don't believe that for a second. The next response was from another case, Paradise Irrigation District versus Commission on State Mandates, and it says that they were given express authority under the Conservation Act to impose fees, so the state's not required to reimburse those costs. Well, I got news for you. You can't make up state laws that violate the state constitution. It's just not simply the way that it works. So again, I say that's an unconstitutional stance, and that's baloney. And then there was another reference to AB, let's see, 1739, about the laws that created SGMA. And this is along the same lines. Supposedly, I guess these lawmakers think that they can make laws that say, no, the state doesn't have to reimburse this. We don't care what the Constitution says. Well, once again, I think it's baloney. Now, the problem here, of course, in one small respect, is that not a single one of you were elected to the positions that you hold. Basically, probably the most life-affecting agency in existence at this time in the Valley, probably ever at any time in the history of this Valley. But you just all kind of got together and agreed to appoint yourselves to this board, and we're going to sit up here and tell everybody what they can do with their water and how it's going to work, and if we're going to toss the ag guys out of business, since we're going to put us in for 5, 6, 7 lawsuits because of it and everything else. Well, let me remind you, even though you weren't elected to this board, every single one of you swore in the positions that you hold to uphold the state constitution. So, if you won't make your lawyers do better than this, then you're disavowing what you vowed to do. It's as simple as that. Read the Constitution for yourself. Read Article 13B, Section 6, and see what you think it says. And then demand proof that state agencies or even the government itself can make laws that violate that Constitution. You do not vow to uphold state law. You vowed to uphold the state constitution. That's what you said you would do. I'd like to see how it works out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Neal. Anyone else?
Renee Westelusk. I'm commenting for my own self. I am proud that you have been able to achieve this groundwater sustainability plan, and I've been supportive of it, of getting it done for several years. And I thank the whole Groundwater Authority Board, the whole team of the Policy Advisory Committee, and the whole team of the TAC, and all the staff for all the hard work, dedication, and time spent. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Any other comments for public consideration? Okay, public hearing is now closed, and as per schedule, we will recess. It is 12:29 now. By that clock, we will, Mr. Johnson, how much time do you need? 10, 15 minutes? 15 minutes. No more, no 15 minutes. We're going to recess till 12:45. 12:45, we will reconvene. Thank you. And we can't all go, we have to be careful of the board. Yeah, okay. Board to reconvene. Okay, we've heard the public on item number 7, and now we'd offer some opportunity for our water resource manager to respond.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. We're going to try, let me, overview, okay? It was all really good comments. I'll tell you, honestly, we've heard probably 95% of them before. It's all stuff we've heard before. Much of it, and I'm going to do it with, Jeff's going to help me with a little bit. Just a couple of items, unless Mick would like something else covered. But from a staff perspective, we've received these comments before about water levels and maybe sub-areas and things about how the basin works. And, you know, this is something that we are clearly aware of. We know what the water levels are, and we know that some of the discussions about potential subbasins, we know all of that. Frankly, I'm just going to give you a big picture. It doesn't make sense to try to manage this basin where you're going to stop pumping in one area, you're going to cut everybody out and have them all change and let people pump in another area and try to manage it going forward. I would almost guarantee you DWR is not going to let you do that. I mean, this basin needs to be managed as a whole. It's connected. Things happen together. There are some areas that aren't pumped as hard. There's some areas that are pumped harder. No question, that happens everywhere. There's discussion about sub-areas and sub-basins. Many areas have sub-basins that are clear sub-basins disconnected, where we have reasons why water doesn't flow from areas to other areas. We don't really see that here, except maybe in the El Paso area. We see some disconnect down there. But for the areas where the pumping is going on, you know, we see the connection and we see impacts. When we model the basin, we run different pumping scenarios, we see impacts to the basin basin-wide. So that's one of the things I wanted to clarify. The information that's been provided to all of you folks in the past, certainly through the TAC, when we prepare our model scenarios, we ran baseline model scenarios that showed that the model did match baseline conditions. We showed hydrographs of wells throughout the basin, key wells, that showed water level decline over periods of years. Some areas were not in 1.5 feet. I think Pat Ferris had some comments there. I think Derek had some area comments, but they did not show the bigger declines. And there's been discussion about whether or not basin-wide it's 1.5 feet or 0.5 foot a year. You know, frankly, those comments are fine, and we certainly take those. But it doesn't matter. I mean, the bottom line is it really doesn't matter, because when we look at the basin as a whole, you saw the model runs, and when we're trying to run the models going forward and pump water out of the basin under different scenarios, the basin suffers unless we can reduce pumping or put more water in. That's just the way it is. And so whether or not somebody says it's 1.5 feet or says it's 0.5 foot, it's in the data, it's in the graphs, it's in the projections, it's in the modeling, so it's all there. and I talked about the subbasins. So I think that's what I wanted to cover real quick. There was one other comment about using the best data, the best science. I think Jeff's going to talk about it a little bit. Just briefly, well, I'll let Jeff talk about it if I have to add.
Okay, and we did get comments regarding the SkyTIM work that's being done. That's been discussed extensively at the TAC meetings. You know, the development of the analysis of the information we have, the technical information, and the report was developed with the TAC. We had some initial discussions about our schedule, about the SkyTIM schedule, to see if we, how those could work together and we could incorporate SkyTIM's work into our work. The schedules did not match up. We needed to, the Navy, provided the model that they had groundwater model that they had created for the GA to use. We reviewed that model. We needed some changes in that model. DRI, the modelers, made changes to that model and recalibrated. The SkyTIM data was not available at that time. The TAC agreed that the model's not perfect. We already have comments on how to improve it, but it was the best tool we have to look at how to change the management of the basin. The TAC had a presentation on some of the preliminary results of SkyTIM. At that time, we were deep into the modeling scenarios and developing the management plan. We did not have time to go back and vet all of the information or what information was available at that time from SkyTIM. They're continuing to work and develop more information or process what they have and put out more product from their work. But all of that was not available at the time that we did the analysis. At some point, we've got to stop so that we can run our models and get our programs proposed, and it just wasn't available at that time. There was general agreement at the TAC that we would look at all of that information, take all the other comments we got about how to improve the model, and going forward, after the plan is adopted and hopefully before the 5-year review, we would come up with a list of how to improve the model, and we'd get that work done and have a better management tool going forward. So we used the best information that was available at the time. We had to make the analysis we made. There may be and will be better data available. Our Prop 1 funding is funding drilling more wells, developing more data, going out and collecting water quality samples, which we've done. There's always going to be new data, and it will always be looked at and going forward, incorporated into our knowledge of the basin. That's all I had.
Mr. Johnson, how you doing down there?
I'm doing good.
Are you done with the responding to
We are done.
comments?
Yes, we're ready to move on. Yes.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate it. Okay, now we're done with that phase, and we're going to open it up to the board for comments and considerations before the vote. Mr. Kaczynski, you want to hit us off?
Sure, I will. First, I want to thank the public for all their comments. I agree with many of them. However, I do believe that we need to reach sustainability in this valley as soon as possible. I want people to remember, and I believe anyway, that the plan is a framework. I mean, words like framework, roadmap. It's adaptive. Amendments can be done, and it will be refined and improved. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't turn one into the state. I also believe that once the plan is in place, that some more hard work, not that hard work hasn't taken place already, but a lot more hard work is going to take place. Project implementation details, cost-benefit analysis, data and modeling refinement will occur. So what I'm trying to say is that the plan is exactly that. It's a framework. It's going to give us the ability now to proceed to the nuts and bolts of solving this issue. And I, for one, appreciate all the work that's taken place. I think that be prepared. There will be a lot more work taking place because we're going to have to solve this issue through actual project implementation. And like I said, I agree with many comments from the public, including getting all the people together from engineering to legal to political. It's going to take a great deal of lifting to get to where we need to go. And so, again, I appreciate everything from the public, and many of your comments are well taken, and believe me, I'm listening to them. Thank you.
Mr. Page.
Thank you, Chairman.
First of all, I want to thank everybody who's here, as well as those in the community and pumpers who have been participating in this process for the last several years. We've reached a very critical, important step today by having a final draft GSP in front of us to comment on, discuss, and decide whether or not to approve. Just as was just mentioned, obviously this is just one step in the process. We do have a lot of difficult work still in front of us, and I definitely want to let you all know that I welcome and encourage all of the stakeholders that have participated thus far to continue to participate and help us achieve the goals that we've set out. The one thing I will point out that I did not hear today and did not see in the letters that I think is really an accomplishment for any basin that's dealing with an issue like this is that this document establishes a sustainable yield. It establishes a number that we believe is what we need to live with in some way, whether that's bringing in additional supplemental water to try to meet some of our needs. But we've agreed on a number, and there are basins out there that spend years debating and arguing over the number itself. And so I really see that as a huge accomplishment for this community, that we have worked together through this process and have agreement on something that's so foundational and critical to us moving forward. So I wanted to mention that, and I wanted to welcome and encourage everybody to continue to participate and help us make some of the difficult decisions we have ahead. Because now that we've set a number, we've got to figure out how do we live within that number, how do we supplement that number, and how do we finance that. These are all very hard things to discuss. But bottom line is that this is what we have in front of us. This is a situation we're in, and yes, costs are going to go up, but unfortunately, that's the true cost of making sure that we have water in the future. So I want to thank everybody and appreciate everyone's participation, the stakeholders, the community, the lawyers, even staff, and my colleagues on the board. I just want to say thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Page. Inyo?
First, I'd like to echo the sentiments expressed by the other board members up here regarding thanking everyone for their hard work and their participation, because this truly is a pretty huge accomplishment just to get this plan drafted in front of us in the timelines that we were given. But I'm here today on behalf of Inyo County to explain the intended no vote on the proposed GSP. We all recognize that the decades of unsustainable water use and overdraft in this basin have brought us to this point, and that reducing water use to the safe yield will impose an incredible hardship on the Indian Wells Valley groundwater basin constituency. So Inyo County does support the concept of importing water into this basin, but Inyo County does not support fixing this self-inflicted crisis with a project that threatens the long-term health of Inyo County's environment and its economy. And we've also got multiple comments from Mono County, the tribes, and environmental groups expressing these same concerns and echoing our issues. But there's additional reasons for Inyo County's position today. First, including the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power import project into this plan is misleading to the public. LADWP has clearly articulated to this agency in no uncertain terms that it will not wheel water and it will not sell water to the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority, period. That position aligns with our understanding that their charter prohibits such water transactions. And they're actually arguing this point right now in court in an ongoing lawsuit we have with them. We are also informed by LADWP that they will not entertain a water banking project without Inyo County's public support, and obviously that support does not exist. There's a couple points here that I would like to make clear. First, the GSP inclusion of the LADW import project is a recharge project that requires an exchange of water. It's not a water banking project. And this recharge project does not reflect the true amount and cost of water that would be needed even if it was legally possible. Even if they could sell us the water, we believe that there's zero chance LA would do that on a one-to-one basis, especially considering that we have cornered ourselves into this position. And our own water acquisition experts, the ones we've signed up to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to, they make this point in an appendix to our draft GSP. It's been buried back there, but it's a real issue. And without a valid cost estimate, which we recognize as a requirement for this GSP, the plan becomes vulnerable. Speaking of valid cost estimates, when you get up to a 2-to-1 and a 3-to-1 water cost for a LADWP project, all of a sudden the other option, AVEC, actually becomes a lower annual cost. But regardless, for this banking project, this basin would need LADWP to bank somewhere around an average of 50,000 acre-feet of water a year to get the 5,000 acre-feet of recharge that we need to stay if we're going to reach our goal of about 11. All of that is just to save one part of this basin's economy and to let agriculture die on the vine. Which brings me to the fourth reason for Inyo County's no vote, our future. The real import option here, although it does have a substantial infrastructure cost, is the AVEC project. AVEC will be a reliable partner, which, as Inyo County learned from its centuries worth of experience dealing with water issues, reliability in your partner is not a given. And AVEC provides a solution that actually allows this basin to continue to be a growing military base and a growing agriculture economy. That pipeline would bring water for as many pistachios and other crops as the water market would allow. Sure, some ag operations would need to furlough while that project is developed, but there would be a future for all of you ag constituents out there. We should not let ourselves be distracted by a hopeless project that does not provide for a collective future. So just to be clear, Inyo County does not support a project that further solidifies its status as a resource colony. Inyo County does not support a project that takes water from a managed and regulated basin to fix its neighbor's depleted aquifer caused by decades of unsustainable water practices. Inyo County does not support a project that the supposed partner isn't even willing to explore and that we've ignored the true costs for. Inyo County does not support a project that misleads the public into a futile chase that dead ends with composting toilets. For all of these reasons and others, we expressly object to the inclusion of the LADWP import project and take the position that it's a violation of the terms of Section 4.04 of the JPA. But what Inyo County does support is a project that addresses the tough reality facing this basin head-on and provides the opportunity for the economy in this basin to grow and the people in this basin to thrive. We look forward to continuing our work with our partners here to help make the AVIC project and the other solutions which we do support to make those solutions a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Inyo. Does the Navy or BLM have thoughts they want to share with us? Please.
Sure. So I don't speak a lot when I'm up here. I've served with the pleasure of the board here. So I just want to say that while the Bureau of Land Management as a federal partner here, we want to support the decision you guys make. We are committed to doing our part for conservation, or we would even be willing to use recycled water to the extent we could. So, I just want to let you guys know that we've enjoyed the opportunity to weigh in on the issues relevant to the federal land surrounding town. We're here to help with permitting and other kind of issues that you guys and Stetson and the water board is going to need help with. So that's all.
Just like to thank for the opportunity that we've had to participate. We look to continue participating as this goes forward, even past whatever the outcome is today.
Thanks, sir. Ridgecrest.
Thank you, Mick. I too want to thank everybody that's been involved with this, from DRI to Stetson and the Pack and Tack and our staff, the directors. It's a lot of hard work. We're tasked with a job here that it's a very important job. The city of Ridgecrest, our concern is providing quality water to the constituents of this of the city. As a director on the board, that also includes the valley, everyone in the entire basin. So it's not just the city. The work ahead of us, I'm optimistic. I think alliances will be made. I think we're going to have a lot of hard work, a lot of forks in the road that we'll be coming to. But I'm optimistic that we're going to get to where we need to be. The future of our existence is pretty much based on this one issue. Anyway, so I commend everybody for their hard work and look forward to furthering this work, this project. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. I want to throw in a couple things. First thing I want to say is that this morning I came in and we had a pre-agenda meeting where we got together, Don and I and some other key members of staff, and we tried to go over the agenda to review it. And as I was preparing for that meeting, I made a list of priorities that I thought we need to establish this year. I'm trying, as a new chair, I'm trying to figure out, okay, what do I got to do? So in December 31st, we can say, okay, we did accomplish these things. And I wanted to be able to lay those markers down now so that we could, at the end of the year, say we did what we wanted to do. And as I was laying these things down, I said, holy mackerel, the work has just begun. I mean, we have so much work ahead of us to do. So I made a list of them, and I went over with them. And one of them, was the GSP. We got to get a GSP sign sometime, whether it's today or whenever. We got to get that thing moving. We got to redefine and reshape our organization. As GSP comes development, post-GSP, new rules take effect, and we have to bring those new rules into our organization, and we have to be able to, as Mr. Kaczynski continues to talk about, as being flexible and being adaptable, and things change, economies change, climates change, technologies change, and we have to be able to create a plan that is going to be able to adjust and shift and be nimble and quick to accommodate our community. I agree with whoever said the 5-year plan is too long. I agree with that one. We need to set augmentation fees. We need to set administration fees. What are those? What are we trying to achieve? We just don't want to come up with numbers. We have to come up with real rationale on real costs, and so we can explain that to the public. We have to create an independence from all other influences so that we can actually and fairly enforce regulation, because that's our job. We need to regulate water use in the Indian Wells Valley. So if the water rates go up, as Mr. Neal suggests, which I don't agree with, but if they go up to some extent, it's not going to be the water district. It's going to be the GSA that's going to be regulating those fees. We got to come to grips with that. We got enforcement. Someone talked about enforcement. We had that conversation this morning. How are we going to enforce this stuff? We're going to talk about meters, whether we like it or not. We have to talk about meters. How are we going to meet? How are we going to create a realistic budget, and how are we going to do that? These are just a simple assortment of things that, as I was going through my thoughts this morning of coming up and developing a strategy for achieving what we're going to achieve this year, what we have to do. There's a lot of work. And so I'm looking forward to the continued participation of everybody as we move forward to solve our common problem. So unless no other board member has comments regarding this, I'm looking forward to a motion. And excuse me, and after the motion is made, if when a motion is made, then I'm going to call out for the vote.
Chairman, I would move that the board vote to approve resolution 0120, which adopts the GSP.
Thank you. Legal, is that the sufficient motion that we're looking for if we want to adopt this GSP?
It is, but I would also like the board to make a finding that per section 10728.6 of the Water Code, that the adoption of the GSP is not a project under CEQA.
And I will, if that's needed, I'll amend my motion. I made the motion assuming that that was mentioned in the resolution itself as well, but I will separately add to the motion that the board approve resolution 0120, which adopts the GSP, as well, that we make a finding that adoption of the GSP is statutorily exempt from further CEQA review pursuant to Water Code section 10728.6.
Thank you, sir. Looking for a second.
I'll second.
Okay, I'm going to call out the vote. Water District.
Yes.
Ridgecrest.
Yes.
San Bernardino County.
Yes.
Inyo County.
No.
Okay, we need 4 votes.
Yes, Chairman, we need 4 votes.
Okay. What I want to say is this. This is a big moment in our history as a community, and we need to regard it as such, and we wouldn't be here without all of you. This document and this GSP, the primary reason for us doing it, in my mind, is all about self-determination. The purpose of the GSP and not kicking the can and booting it to the state has always been that we need to shape our own future. It is unacceptable for the state to come in and define our future. Whatever we do today and whatever we continue to do as we change and modify and adjust our GSP, we're going to be doing it ourselves because it's our future and we're responsible for it. There are multiple challenges. It's a unique basin that requires constant monitoring and adjustment. We need to challenge every assumption we make. We need to challenge every decision we make continuously, and we need to incorporate that and institutionalize that in the process. We have enjoyed, I think, in my opinion, the best thing about this GSA is the public participation, whether it's the TAC or the PAC, or people commenting or people contributing, and we cannot lose that. If we lose that, we lose the credibility that we so desperately need. So whatever we do as we move forward, we need to shape our organization in a way that maximizes continued transparency and continued maximum participation. This is the beginning, and it's only the beginning, and the work is truly down the road, and we need to understand that that we got a lot of work to do. I want to thank the board. I want to thank all the staff, every member of the staff who's participated. I know personally, and I've seen staff go above and beyond like I've never seen before, and I'd like to thank each and every one of them. But most importantly, I'd like to thank the public. I'd like to thank you for your patience. I'd like to thank you for your determination, your contributions, and the civil tone and manners within which we have made decisions and moved the ball to this point. God bless Indian Wells Valley. Kern County says yes. We have a GSP. Okay. That's done with number 7. Let's move on to,
Chairman, if I could just make one comment. I wanted to let Director Vallejo know that I take to heart some of the comments he made about why LADWP is not an option. And I'm committed as we try to implement this, that's something we will address. Your concerns regarding that. That's not something we're going to ignore. We didn't vote yes just because we didn't hear you. So I'm committed, and I wanted to say that publicly, that I'm committed to address that issue. And when we do our first update, if we need to remove that from the plan, then we do.
Thank you.
Hear, hear. Okay, that's done. Before we move on to item 8, I have something I was remiss in doing earlier today. I want to do it now. I want to take a moment to thank last year's chairman, Mr. Kaczynski. I have our first inaugural Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority Certificate of Recognition. We'll probably see plenty of these going forward, but I want to take a moment to thank Ron for a tough year. And I thought you managed it well and herding the cats and getting everybody moving in a direction that was in the best interests of this valley. And I thought you did a great job, Ron. Thank you very much. Okay, now let's move on to number 8. Let's kick that off with the general manager. You guys got to shift seats or something like that? And then the general manager will kick us off with number 8, the presentation on readiness and environmental protection and integration, the REPI program.
Okay, agenda item number 8. As way of background, in December 2002, Congress gave the Department of Defense Services the authority to enter into agreements with qualified organizations and non-federal agencies to limit encroachment by enacting Section 2684A of Title 10 of the United States Code, the Readiness and Environmental Protection Integration, known as REPI program. Through REPI, the DoD works with state and local governments and nonprofit conservation organizations to address challenges to the military mission. REPI enhances military readiness and helps to avoid more expensive alternatives such as training workarounds and mission relocation by preventing, mitigating, or reducing restrictions on testing and training missions. REPI achieves this goal through the conservation of open and natural spaces outside installation fence lines that can help avoid incompatible land use, reduce environmental hazards, and protect habitat for wildlife. A key component of the REPI program is the use of buffer partnerships among the military services, private conservation groups, and state and local governments. There are two types of DoD funding for REPI buffer partnerships. Number one, service funds, or number two, REPI program funds that that are identified by Congress in a line item in the DoD budget. The REPI program does not provide funding to partners through an open grants program. Rather, each service submits project proposals for funding and specifies how REPI partnerships and their projects are planned, identified, reviewed, and approved. Under the Department of the Navy, installations develop an encroachment management program, known as the EMP, to address compatibility and readiness sustainability. As a key component of the EMP, Encroachment Partnership Program provides a tool to implement the 2684A authority and REPI program funding through the development of an encroachment protection agreement, known as the EPA. Of course, the government and Navy likes their acronyms. The Encroachment Protection Agreement is generally a multi-year agreement between a Navy installation and its partners that identifies geographic areas of mutual interest and governs how each party will conduct a transaction under the REPI program. The REPI program at NAS China Lake is used to address incompatible land use changes, loss of habitat, and environmental issues that can affect the mission capabilities of the installation. As identified in the draft GSP and previously discussed at TAC and PAC meetings, if not properly mitigated, increased dust from voluntary retired agricultural lands in the valley could affect the health and well-being of the Indian Wells Valley community, groundwater-dependent ecosystems, and the NAS China Lake mission capabilities in the ranges and the R2508 airspace. As potential increased airborne dust could affect the community in NAS China Lake, the REPI program could be a potential source of funding for dust mitigation measures. So at this time, we have a presentation. Mr. John Kersey is here. He is the Community Planning Liaison Officer. And just for the board's information, this is just a presentation. It's a receive and file item. No action expected.
Thank you. Go.
John Kersey, Community Planning Liaison Officer, also known as the CPLO or CPLO, depends on who you're talking to. I am also the Encroachment Partnering Program Manager for NAS China Lake. So, doesn't want to work. There we go. All right. In 2002, Congress enacted U.S. Code Section 2684 Alpha, more lovingly known as REPI, or the Readiness and Environmental Protection Integration. Now you can see why we go by REPI. So the purpose of that is a key tool for installations to work towards reducing or avoiding restrictions on training and testing missions at individual service installations. DoD funding for REPI partners with state agencies as well as local governments and NGOs, but it can also be used with other federal programs as well, but it depends on the program. It does not provide funding through open grants, as was already identified. Each installation actually implements that project and puts it into the system. I'll go into a little more detail. The main purpose, though, of the REPI buffering partnership is to come to a mutual and beneficial benefit, so a win-win for all partners. It is a conservation partnership. The main purpose of this is to limit incompatible land use, whether it's certain management activities or land development, maintaining recreation areas. Meet Endangered Species Act requirements on and off the installation. We don't want to become a island of last resort when it comes to endangered species, because activities off the installation can force those species onto the installation. And then, of course, mitigate environmental hazards and other situations that can impact our mission as well as the community. It cannot fund infrastructure, though. There are ways that in this particular situation for the pipeline, I know this is being brought up, that it may be able to help on land components, but for the actual construction of infrastructure, it cannot do that. That one would be the Defense Community Infrastructure Pilot Program that was appropriated $50 million in the most recent NDAA. That would be the more likely opportunity for infrastructure, but REPI may have some opportunities on helping on the land components. Encroachment Management Program through the Navy is, of course, just that. It's developed by the individual installation because it needs to fit the encroachment issues for each installation, and those, of course, vary depending on location. Even installations within San Diego, while we have multiple installations there, their issues are not consistent. So it is specific to us, that particular installation's needs. Encroachment Partnering Program is the key component that has to be in place to implement 2684 Alpha funds. So there is that partnership requirement, and it does come with some cost-sharing components as well, but those can be looked at, including, of course, financial, in-kind services, and some other factors. The Encroachment Protection Agreement is the main component. We have to have partners on an encroachment protection agreement to actually be able to use those funds with that partner. Once you're on our plan, any funds that come in the future are good, but unfortunately we can't use old funds with new partners, but we can use that money once you're in the system. If I bring it in for one project, it doesn't work, we can shift it to help other partners within the agreement. So there are some ways that it does work, and there are limitations on the partnership itself. It is a multi-year agreement between a Navy installation and the partner. It does stipulate the geographic area of concern. So in this case, Indian Wells Valley, if we're looking at that. And then, of course, the mutual interests that are there. It also governs how the transaction can be conducted, identifying if a partner is actually a funding partner, that sort of thing. That is actually determined and defined within the EPA as well. The way that the REPI process works is it all starts at the installation level. Of course, in my case, I get to go out and help and evaluate encroachment problems, start establishing new partners, putting those projects together, and then submitting them at the local level into a primary REPI database system, and then that is pushed forward to the region. The region starts looking at the entire region of all projects that are submitted. They then start asking additional questions and deciding which projects can move forward to the next level. And then it goes to the service headquarters. This is where those two different types of funds are determined. It is not up to the installation or region. It is determined by, in this case, the Navy headquarters would decide if it's going to be service funds or if it's going to be specific to the REPI appropriated funds that are done each year. If there are continued resolutions, this process can be delayed when it comes to the final stage, which is, of course, OSD, the Office of the Secretary of Defense, making the final determinations. They look at all the projects that are coming in from all branches of the military from across the globe. So it's not just a U.S.-based program, it is a worldwide program when it comes to dealing with encroachment for installations. Once they get it, they'll rank the projects, they'll determine how much is going to be appropriated, whether it is the actual requested amount or value they see appropriate, and then distribute and those funds for implementation. The overall process takes at least a year for a final determination to come out. And then if there are any projects that were not funded, they will just return back, basically starting within about a month, and the process can go up. We can either redefine the language to try and further strengthen what needs to be done, or try and adjust what needs to be corrected to make the project work. It'll continue to stay in the queue for at least 5 years. The NAWS-REPI program, we have had it in place since 2008. We've got 8 amendments, and most of those amendments come with adding new partners or changing new projects. Or the most recent amendment, though, was the actual extension of adding all the partners to continue on for another 5 years. That's a common range that we put on these projects. The partners that we have in place are the Nature Conservancy. Of course, they made comments along with the Audubon Society, Transition Habitat, Trust for Public Lands, and then our most recent project that was finalized was the Parks and Recreation with Onyx Ranch, the OHV area. So it's a diverse program on how it can work. Overall, it highlights over 24,000 acres preserved through different means, 53 transactions on individual parcels, and a total shared cost of $18.6 million. So between what the Navy provides as well as our partners, it can help bring a lot of funding to individual projects. The main reason, again, that I was addressing this is, one, we did have it brought up by the water marketer on funding possibly the importation of water, but unfortunately that is a limitation of the REPI program. But again, I may have some different options on how we can still support the program. It just wouldn't be the development of pipeline or anything like that, but we can help on the land component. As discussed at the TAC and PAC, it's been brought up that, of course, increased dust depending on different directions on the management plan and how it's implemented. Increased dust is going to affect the community. It impacts the groundwater-dependent ecosystems, especially if they start blowing and we get moving dunes, that sort of thing, that can damage the groundwater-dependent ecosystems, especially with a large proportion of those being on the installation, as well as impacts to other endangered species that we all know are in the area. And then, of course, it affects the operation and mission capabilities at NAWS China Lake. Pilots can't fly if they can't see. We can't land on airfields covered in dust, and we can't use facilities if they're also dealing with major dust issues and everything else. So it's a beneficial situation for everyone. And as it's been brought up, of course, in the GSP itself, that dust mitigation is something that will have to be at least examined and considered. And then it is a possible funding option if you so choose to go that direction. Beyond that, any questions?
Let's open it up to the public. The public have any thoughts? Mr. Janis. You come down,
Dave
Derek.
Janis, speaking as the Executive Director for the China Lake Alliance, not the PAC chair, but as an individual. This is a no-risk, no-cost opportunity for us to team with a bunch of folks that have concerns in the same areas that we do with some of the effects of what's going to come out of our groundwater sustainability plan and management now, plus well into the future. And John is focused on dust mitigation because that's one that specifically came up for consideration in policy discussions at the policy committee and the technical advisory committee. There are many other potential applications for this, not water infrastructure itself. But, for example, the Tui Chub was one that we brought to the table on this. That there is an allocation for the Tui Chub in our GSP, and it uses much more water than you might suspect. And if that was a non-native species brought into the valley here, that potentially, with the approval of some of the agencies and support in funding from some of the partners that are already in the REPI agreement that NAWS has could, if agreement is reached, be moved and gain that water supply back for our uses more productively in this valley. That's just one example. So it's a flexible option, no cost, no risk to us, and it may provide a long-term flexible method to address other funding sources and meeting needs of all these groups together. So I'd urge you to consider this favorably. I know there is, on the dust mitigation issue specifically, there's a conference coming up next month. And if you're considering being a partner with them, I think the conference is in San Antonio.
No, Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Tulsa, Oklahoma, just a little north of San Antonio. Yeah. But nonetheless, it's how to do this and what the benefits are. And I think, as we've heard, we know we already have funding challenges, and we know the plan itself has some very high numbers. We need every resource we can bring to the table to lower the cost to all of the members or all the community pumpers and users in this valley. So strongly support it.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, with just to emphasize on the no obligation, Transition Habitat was on our EPA for 5 years before we finally actually submitted a project with them.
Thank you.
They were not obligated in any funds until that point.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Hoffman, I thought I saw you trying to get up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Derek Hoffman, attorney for Meadowbrook. I appreciate Mr. Janis's comments about other options for the funding, because until he spoke, it sounded to me like this was simply implementing the GSP. So I'm eager to hear more about the alternative uses for that funding, because again, what I was initially hearing was the GSP forces ag into a temporary pool, causes them to fallow their land, and then the Navy comes in to pay for the dust mitigation, which seems getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. I appreciate those comments. Any other comments from the public? Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing and open to the board for comments, consideration. Ms. Kaczynski.
What's involved in becoming a partner?
It would require one, I actually have to reach out to all of the existing partners and make sure that they have no problems adding a new partner. That can take, on average, anywhere from 3 to 6 months. It depends on how fast they reply. Then we have to get everything over to our region office, and they start drafting a new amendment to the EPA, send it out, and then all partners must sign and agree.
And the more partners you have, probably the better, the more you can involve people?
It can actually, on putting together projects, if we can bring more partners to the table, it shows a greater benefit to a larger group. So there is that benefit, but a lot of the projects have a tendency to just be one of our partners working together, but
and that was my last question. Yeah. So basically, there's really no cost unless a project is brought forward by one of the partners, and then there may be costs involved, obviously, for sharing and such, like you mentioned.
Right.
But it's possible that another partner might benefit from that project as well.
That can also be brought to the table.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
So yeah, a lot of the partners, in some cases, they may just be helping get certain things moving. Another partner's coming in as a funding partner, and so there's a lot of different ways that the program can work.
Thank you, sir. Any other board member comments? Okay, we'll move on to item number...
Oh, Chairman Gleason, I do have one more thing. Just to explain the timing of this presentation, there is a workshop on February 19th and 20th in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that the Compatible Lands Foundation is hosting for REPI stakeholders. It is an in-depth look at the Department of Defense's Readiness and Environmental Protection Integration Program, REPI, and how it's implemented. If there is interest in anybody getting more information on what the program is and how it's implemented, this is the opportunity. That's why this was brought up at this time.
That does include NGOs, other local governments that have also gone into the program or are considering it. It will have actually OSD level representation as well to provide how the program works, opportunities, and some of the things that have been accomplished through the program.
Yeah, my thoughts were, what are the applications for this, and how can we benefit from using this capability? The Two Each Hub is one, waste management is, water treatment, maybe another one, teaming with other partners that are already doing work, another one. There's a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm eager to learn more about it. So what's your question? Don, do you have a question?
It wasn't necessarily a question. I was just bringing to mind that there is a workshop, if there's interest in becoming a partner, that this would be a good opportunity to get more information. In Tulsa, Oklahoma.
I nominate Ron. we'll see what we can do. We'll see what we can do. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Let's move to item number 9, Water Resource Manager Report. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very, very short report. There is no PowerPoint, but those of you who have agendas have some basic slides there. I'm just going to mention a couple quick things on the first one, Prop 1 status. We do have a draft application or a submittal of an invoice number 3, in with DWR. It's a draft right now, a little over $185,000. We're waiting to hear back from, working on the progress report, waiting to hear back from them. That covered the period April through June 2019. We're about one full quarter behind right now, primarily because of the GSP work. But we are working on invoice number 4, so that's going forward. The SDAC stuff, we do have a letter in front of DWR waiting for a written response authorizing an extension of the Prop 1 agreement. And then we also have financial cash flow decisions to make at the board level, but that'll come back. But we are in front of DWR for that extension of the agreement on Prop 1. And lastly, more of the good news, Prop 68 grant status. I'm not giving you the real good news. We haven't got the grant yet, but that grant is for a little over $750,000. About roughly half of that is picking up some past costs, which is good. We need that, as you know, with the financial situation we're in. The good news on that is that, much like the Prop 1 grant, the amount in the applications is very close to the amount budgeted. So when that happens, a lot of times DWR is amenable to grant all of the applications for funding, but we'll see. We're supposed to hear in March. That's all I have.
Thank you, sir. Number 10, Groundwater Sustainability Report, Water Resiliency, and Request for Funding Consideration, Naval Air Weapons Station, China Lake, California. Don.
Sure. If I could just add one more thing to what Steve was saying. There was a workshop co-hosted by the Department of Water Resources and State Water Resources Control Board in Clovis on January 9th. The video is available online, so I watched it. It's 2 hours and 45 minutes. Yeah. Just specifically for the Prop 68, there were 54 applicants, and there's $50 million available. So the total that was applied for is $53 million. So again, to reiterate what Steve was saying, a very good chance that will be funded.
Good job.
Okay, item number 10, the Groundwater Sustainability Report. The Capital Core Group has been actively seeking potential sources for an infrastructure project, which is yet to be determined, to provide an augmented water supply to make up the difference between the annual recharge of 7,650 acre-feet reported in the Groundwater Sustainability Plan and the 12,000 acre-feet deemed necessary to meet the anticipated demand. One potential source of funding identified is through the Department of Defense Communities Infrastructure Program, or DCIP. The Congress has authorized $100 million for this program, but has not funded an appropriated amount. However, the conference committee staff has agreed upon a $50 million appropriation for the DCIP in the FY 2020 bill, and that's pending congressional vote and signature of the President. Capital Corps has engaged with the Assistant Secretary of the Navy regarding the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and the draft GSP process. Briefings have also occurred with the Director of Installation Resilience. At the Director's request, Capital Corps provided the draft GSP to the Director on December 5th, and they have had it under review. Discussions with the Assistant Secretary have reached the point where it's necessary to justify the need for an infrastructure project and make an official request of the Department of Defense to consider funding support. The report in your packet makes the case for a $15 million request to support a water infrastructure project through the DCIP and other programs that may be applicable. The draft of this report was provided to the authority staff for review and comment, and the report in your packet includes those comments. It's important to get this report to the Navy prior to funding considerations on DCIP beginning. If the authority desires to have funding in 2023, the funding must be secured by FY 2021, which means decisions must be pursued from the Navy in 2020. The timing is such that this report must be presented to the Navy by the end of February. Staff believes it's imperative Capital Corps be allowed to remain engaged in advocating on behalf of the authority to establish a priority for DCIP funding of an infrastructure project in the Indian Wells Valley. In the past, the DCIP has been looked upon as the slush fund, so support for funding it has been lukewarm to say the least. With $50 million now working its way through the legislative process, it's important the case be made for the funds to be allocated for projects involving critical infrastructure rather than pork-type projects. Capital Corps has initiated the process of forming a coalition with four other military installations with needs related to critical water infrastructure, some of which are immediate and shovel-ready. The strategy is to support these installations with more immediate needs so that when the time comes for the Indian Wells Valley to make its case, they will support our request. The four installations and projects are Mountain Home, Idaho, which has a need for $62 million for an immediate interconnection as they stand to lose their water rights. Leavenworth, Kansas, $1.7 million for an interconnection to augment their supply. Clovis, New Mexico, $30 million for a $6 million pipeline to bring water from the Ute Reservoir. And Enid, Oklahoma, $45 million for a 70-mile pipeline project. Capital Corps has outlined a specific task with costs and a timeline to accomplish the objective of garnering support for DCIP funding for a local water infrastructure project. This information is in the board packet. Capital Corps understands the current financial constraints which the authority is under and has indicated a willingness for the authority to defer payments if necessary until such time as fees are in place to cover these costs. They do ask that any travel expenses incurred would be reimbursed. For the action from the board, staff recommends the board support the Network Foundation Capital Corps has established to date, advocating on its behalf to secure funding for the DCIP, and authorize Capital Corps to deliver the groundwater sustainability report in your packet to the Navy, continue to develop the coalition for critical water infrastructure and other specific projects as outlined in their proposal, and it is understood payment for services related to these specific tasks will be deferred until such time as the authority has the fees in place to cover these expenses. Another couple things that weren't included in the staff report that I got late. The contract with Capital Corps expires 1 year from the date that it was established, which is March 21st of 2019. So their contract expires March 21st of 2020. So they have requested in their communication to extend the contract through December. It may not be necessary. According to their schedule, bringing the DCIP request forward will take at least through June based on the tasks they put in the packet. The other thing is and I don't think, maybe there is formal board action required, but they are asking to move funding from Task 2, which is negotiations of transfer wheeling agreements, to Task 3 to determine and secure funding sources. It's just an internal transaction. The total amount of the contract does not change. So it's just a matter of shifting funds around between the two tasks. So that's the request or the recommendation from the board, or from the staff to the board.
Recommendation from whom?
Recommendation from staff to the board.
The recommendation of staff is to do what you said, okay. Mr. Page.
Don, I had a couple questions. I get the benefit of partnering with other communities that have water infrastructure needs. That makes a lot of sense to me. The question I had, though, was that those other communities, when you add up all their requests as part of, there's $50 million that potentially is going to get included in the budget for this project. You add up those other four, they exceed $138 million. So, and then Capital Corps is only suggesting that we request $15 million when the high-end estimate for just our engineering costs for infrastructure for supplemental water is $28 million. I'm wondering how we arrived at how they arrived at 15 being the recommendation of what we request, or should we? And I don't know whether these partners are discounting what they're asking for, or if we should include in our request as part of this partnership what our true costs are for infrastructure for supplemental water to this basin.
Well, first, just to be clear again, those four projects, not all of them are ready to go in this current fiscal year. The one with the immediate need is the Mountain Home, Idaho. I don't know that they would get, the 50 million is what's working its way through appropriation. It could be, yes, yes. So, yeah. So we're trying to get in queue, if you will, for a project in the future. So we're looking at fiscal year 2023. So these other projects, we would continue in that within that coalition to advocate for. The key thing is making this funding available for critical infrastructure, not projects such as, my understanding in the past, there have been requests to put in a trail, a public trail, to enhance a park, those sorts of things. And the feeling is that this money needs to be spent on critical. There is a need, and the money should be spent on critical infrastructure, particularly with water being an issue in the West.
Yeah. No, and I get that. I guess my basic question is are we underselling ourselves by only requesting $15 million when our construction costs exceed $200 million? Our engineering cost estimate is $28 million. That's what I'm trying to get at. Is I don't want to necessarily scare off the federal government that we need too much, but I'm just curious in terms of staff and talking with Capitol Corps whether that kind of discussion took place of what's the right amount to include in our request.
I believe they're looking at $15 million from this program, and they are looking at other programs, not just federal but statewide, to fund the project. But again, it's an undefined project, so at this point in time, we're just trying to get in a placeholder, if you will, in for funding.
Hey, Don, is Capitol Corps on the phone?
No.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
So as I understand is that what we would do is advocating for these other four in order to have them advocate for us.
Basically forming a coalition to...
Right, a coalition.
To make water infrastructure a priority for this funding.
Okay, and the $50 million is 2020 money, is that correct? So in other words, if we get as part of this coalition, then we begin advocating for water infrastructure becoming a priority. Will we now be advocating for increased amounts? Because each year it'll change. I don't know if the answer is from Dave or from... Would you please? Yeah.
I spoke to Capitol Corps yesterday on this because we work with them in my role as executive director of the China Lake Alliance, and they said they thought they were going to be on the phone today. So my apologies, I was wrong. However, DCIP, we've had that program authorized for this is the third year now, and it has never achieved the funding because of this perception that it was a slush fund for 5G networks and all kinds of other things. What we had discussed, because we work in this arena as the China Lake Alliance in advocacy for the base, the community, and that includes some of the grants, potential grants for the infrastructure that would support what may come out of the GSP plan. So there are overlapping responsibilities. We coordinate with them. The strategy for DCIP, it originally was proposed as $200 million this year, and what they essentially did is they finally said, okay, you guys have been pounding at our door. We're going to give you 50, and we're going to see what you do with it. And so the strategy this year is the Navy. I'm sorry. DOD hasn't defined the criteria for a program or for a project in the program. And the strategy this year is to influence them with this coalition as they have to define it quickly now to spend the FY20 money for critical infrastructure only, which obviously our base has been designated. This is the #1 encroachment issue. And so we would join that coalition to do that this year. And in so doing, they would support us in the future years for for two things. One is to expand DCIP out to a much greater number. Two is to line us up for priority for the greater number later. 15 is a placeholder right now in conjunction with some other things that could change in the future. It could be upped to answer your question, Bob. Does that help?
Yes, it does. So as I understand it then, is that not only will we be joining this sort of coalition, so our benefit for this is the fact that we get in line, they know we're here, we advocate for water infrastructure work, as well as advocate for increasing the amount that is allocated each year.
Yeah, and there's a multiplicative factor here, and that there are many other potential grants on the table, and we gain awareness among those in the community about this and our priorities and future support from those other 4 entities in those arena as well. So this is a force multiplier.
Chairman Gleason, I just was advised that Capitol Court is watching, so if you'd like to talk to them, they can call in.
You just asked
It's
me
up.
Right now, I don't think we need to, but we'll put them on hold, keep them there.
Okay.
Tom, thank you very much. We'll let them know if we need
I do want to call your attention to the document in the package, which outlines their specific tasks and the costs associated, so you see what they're looking at doing, specific meetings, briefings, that sort of thing. So,
Okay, thank you. Ridgecrest.
Yeah, so it appears we're going to be looking at several different sources and grants to acquire the money for the infrastructure. And so with the, in getting NQ and getting 15 million, is there any stipulations on how soon that money has to be spent? Are there any constraints in that area? If we're trying to pool together various, different
my understanding is when a project is specifically developed, that money would go towards that project along with any other funding that was approved for that project. So that would just be one component of funding that project.
Okay. So, I mean, if we were approved for it, I guess the basic question is if we were approved for the 15 million, would there be a time limit on when we would have to have our project in progress to and spend that money?
Fortunately, we have a professional federal guy who understands dollars, federal dollars. Dave.
Ex-federal. I am not. I'm not currently federal. I don't represent the base or any federal entity. We work with folks in their advocacy in some cases, though. In this case, the plan is we're not talking about the 15 going for FY20 money that is in this budget. It would come out of future allocations, and depending on the color of the money in federal terms, you'd have a certain amount of time to spend it. Part of that reason that Capitol Corps has taken and the staff has recommended to you that we join this coalition that Capitol Corps is helping form for us is that we aren't ready to submit something. They have requirements that are going to say, what are you going to do with this? And we don't have a project defined well enough this year in the timeline for what requires getting access to some of that 50 million. So we're joining the coalition to focus the criteria, make sure it is set at critical infrastructure, and then while this year we are doing the work Chairman referred to earlier in defining what is our critical project that meets their requirement needs so that we can get it prioritized and get the FY21 allocation for that. That's the strategy. And then typically that money, we need to have it ready to go this time or earlier next year to get in that queue. And then when the money is allocated, we will go through the process to get it with us and execute it in the timeline they require. So that year was to develop the ability to be able to meet the timeline.
Okay.
Don, how much are we talking about for Capitol Corps here?
On the budget sheet that they turned in, Task 3, which is the looking for funding sources, $73,800. Task 2 is reduced. They're taking money from that to the $26,125. So the total is $99,925, which added to what costs they've incurred is under the current contract.
So this is an additional how much money to keep them on?
It's not an additional. It's within the contract, approved contract amount.
Okay.
So you're not adding any more money, but just moving money around from one
cost
task
of
to
the
another.
action? About
The cost of the action would be from the contract $99,925. And again, this is in your packet. It breaks it down by what the specific tasks are. Some of these may not be necessary. Specifically, the governor's office was mentioned. The meetings there may not be necessary. So this is just if you will, I guess, a worst case budget.
Thank you. Mr. Kaczynski, I know you want to talk.
Yes, one more quick question for Dave, if you can. Mr. Janik, question. The 15 million, is that will that be a set amount? In other words, when we finally define the project?
It'll depend on the project
That's
itself.
what I'm saying. We're getting a placeholder for 15 million, but when a project
Well,
defined,
the project is likely to be much higher than
Right.
that, and this would be a
Sort of a
it'd be a
plate-
multi-year funding.
We're not
effort
committing-
is what the
yeah.
longer-term strategy may be.
So we're not committing to
Maybe.
15 million. Okay, that's the question I have.
And we have to define that.
Yeah, I realize we're going to have to define it eventually, and I guess the question goes on to the cost. Obviously, is I think what Director Gleason was looking at is just to get us in the queue and follow up with this particular part of the project at DCIP. How much is that? Do we know? I looked at that. I sort of tried to sort it out, and I can't. And I'm not saying that more isn't needed, because obviously it's a long-term plan of continue to negotiate and work our way into this. So that may be not really a valid question. We're looking at $98,000 is what we're looking at.
For just moving the DCIP
Yeah.
advocacy forward and the funding, based on what they've turned in, it looks like the DCIP procedures regulatory item, that is $18,175 estimated. And moving the funding request forward to the Assistant Secretary of Navy, the total on the right-hand side, if you've got that sheet in front of you, is $37,850. But there is a Phase 2 lobbying. If you're looking at the schedule, under that particular item, if you go to where it says review the questions, at that point, that would be moving it to the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and that would take them through June, is what they've said. There's another 75 hours of their labor in the Phase 2 lobbying. So to answer your question, I guess to move it all the way through the process, you're looking at $18,175 plus 37, roughly $55,000.
And we can pull that, we can stop that anytime, right?
If you so choose, yes.
Got it. Thank you very much. Let's go to the public. Public have any thoughts about this item number 11, I think. 10.
Judy Decker, President of the Eastern Kern County Resource Conservation District, PAC member who sat in on choosing Capital Corps for you people. I think you should follow through with exactly what your water manager suggested, Mr. Zadiba. You have an opportunity that I would at this point say, have to take to get yourself in line to get federal funding. It's the only way we're going to get outside water. I believe Capital Corps has done an outstanding job for you in a situation where we all know that our national government is not working 100% for the citizens of this country. And I think they have the in and the ability to move little old Ridgecrest, Indian Wells Valley, GSP needs forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board for comment, consent, and a vote.
From Inyo County's perspective, a few things. One, I'd like to get in contact with the Oklahoma construction partner that they're using for the 70-mile pipeline at $45 million. That'd be helpful. But on a more maybe relevant note, the same concerns we have that we just expressed at agenda item 7, we have the same concerns here regarding being misleading. We would request that the background information provided in the draft letter, request for funding participation, that Capital Corps proposes to submit be amended to remove any reference to the LADWP project. There are some confusing things in there. For example, on the last paragraph of the discussion section, it speaks to having requested $15 million to the governor and the state legislature should the Groundwater Authority choose the LADWP, period, probably the project, a word missing there. But there are some, I believe, some misleading statements with specifically with respect to that, in addition to it being misleading to include that project as viable in the first place. Also, on a kind of a little technical note, that same paragraph I was just referencing refers to SIGMA as being an unfunded mandate. That's obviously a term of art that we should probably amend. A mandate that was not provided with funding or something to that effect. So anyhow, that's the big picture issue from Inyo County, is the inclusion of LADWP in these requests, because we do not believe it's a viable project.
Thank you, sir. Any other thoughts? Mr. Page.
Yeah, I would support that request that staff, and if that needs to include council, work with Capitol Corps to correct this letter, such as some of the things you've mentioned with the LID project, as well as making any mention of unfunded mandate. I don't think that helps our case. We have a need here to address our water resources and how it affects the naval base. So I don't know that it needs to be mentioned as an unfunded mandate.
So are we proposing that we take the LADWP option off the table?
I don't know that it's necessary for, at this point, to mention the specific. I mean, I know we don't have all the project details, so I don't know how much is necessary to get to that minimum point of getting in the queue. So, given that we don't have a specific project committed either way, I don't know how important it is to mention LADWP versus AVEC.
That would be my request, is to remove it. We still have, obviously, the AVEC conversation in there, which is a higher cost, so we're still trying to justify an actual cost. It's just a matter of whether or not we as a board determine that justification we're trying to prove is viable or not, and obviously Inyo County has a position on that.
Could I weigh in just for a minute down here? So the difference in pipeline length between the AVEC and the DWP options are considerable and involve a lot of federal land, of which our friend the Desert Tortoise lives on. And so please consider that in your cost. But you've just heard two good funding sources, potential funding sources today, which make the longer option a lot more viable. AVEC is what I'm talking about. So I realize you guys have just adopted the GSP, through the resolution today, but perhaps it would make it more palatable to DWR if you had a more detailed funding implementation plan, which could include these two sources and others. I mean, if money's going to fall out of the federal sky, why not write it down and show the state that you have the beginnings of a plan to fund it?
Go ahead.
I agree about getting unfunded mandate portion out of there. I also would suggest, if possible, that can this be written in such a way, because I agree too that we haven't really identified a project until we begin to see cost-benefit analysis and some more detailed analysis of cost and operation. I don't know that we can say one or the other is going to work. And so I'm going to ask that, is it possible to word that in such a way, I'm not sure what that is, that leaves our options open but still shows that we're considering projects. And I'd be asking a bridge too far, but we'll see.
My thought was just take mentions of both of them off. Either one of them.
I would suggest we could do that and just put the costs in there. A project ranging from $50 million to whatever, something like that.
How does this impact our budget? Is this in our budget? Where is this in relation to our current budget? This new expenditure?
My understanding is we approved the contract, so we did put that in the budget, but the money we have the cash flow issue, obviously.
Yeah.
So we would probably, I was talking to legal counsel here, that we have the $500,000 that the water district advanced in fees and the $500,000 from the county. It's a paper transaction, but we could make that happen to fulfill the obligation of that contract.
Thanks, sir. Did we have a public comment? We already had public.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's in the budget.
Thanks. It's in the budget.
It's still here.
Okay. Okay, I'm looking for a motion and a vote.
So in the motion, we would include extending the contract through December because the contract expires in March.
Can we take these one at a time, the contract and then the letter itself and those types of things?
Sure.
I would make a motion that we modify the contract to make the term open-ended and maintain the not-to-exceed cost amount so that we can make a decision on costs as we move forward without having to worry about a deadline to revisit the contract term.
We have a motion.
Chairman?
Mr. Page.
Would the maker of the motion amend that to add, you said open-ended, could we add a term to that we're extending it? I have a problem with evergreen contracts, so.
With what?
Evergreen contracts. They don't have an end date. We need to have an end date. I mean, I get that we're not increasing the cost, and I support that, but I just philosophically have a problem with approving an evergreen contract.
I believe that General Manager mentioned December as an end date.
No, I know he did, but I'm just saying the maker of the motion said
I see.
open-ended. So I was asking if he would amend that to what they were asking for in terms of term.
I'm generally okay with the concept of putting a date on there, but Don, are we going to have to see this again come December in any substantial chance, or should that be the end of it? I just don't want to have to come back just to extend the term of the contract.
No, I think that would be the end of it. As I said, it looks like the gist of the work should be done through June and carry over for maybe a couple of months, but they gave us the date of December. But as just pointed out, the board does not have to approve an extension of the contract at this meeting because it doesn't expire until the end of March 21st. So we could consider that part of it next month if you wish. Don't have to do that at this meeting.
Is there a reason? Okay. Is there a reason to delay, in staff's opinion?
Yes, there is. It's actually not listed on the Brown Act to extend the contract.
Okay, we will wait.
It's on the agenda.
We will wait then.
We should bring it back in February.
Okay.
But we can talk about the letter, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Just the extension of the contract is not agendized, so.
I'm okay with delaying, then that's fine.
Okay.
So when it comes to the letter, I would request that I'll make a motion that we authorize staff and in conjunction with Capital Corps to amend the letter to remove the references, at least in my opinion. We can modify this if we want further discussion, but to modify the letter to remove references to the LADWP project specifically, and to make those make that at least that one other change regarding the unfunded mandate language, and then to be able to send that letter after those modifications have been made.
I believe that with the caveat, I agree with Director Gleason that if we can remove those projects because they haven't been well defined enough and we just put a dollar amount in and generally speak about projects, I prefer that as to just removing one and not the other.
So is that a second?
It's a second with that caveat, yes, with that request.
Okay, so let's I want a clear understanding of what the motion is. What's the motion? John?
The motion is to modify the letter, and who would modify it would be Capital Corps in conjunction with our staff, to remove the references to the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power project specifically.
And any project, any specific project?
My motion is just to remove the LADWP project specifically, and how about we can remove references to any project if Capital Corps believes that would be sufficient and effective. But if we need to have an identified project in there, the LADWP one, I believe, shouldn't be, but AVEC should.
Can you live with that?
I can live with this, but I gotta be frank that as we go through the process of this plan, I'm not going to be persuaded to just always eliminate LADWP. They're an option, whether they're viable or not. I have no idea. But I'm not willing to completely cut them out for consideration in any discussions about water importation.
I would like to add to that. That's my concern. That's why I brought up, are we looking at dropping this, off the table? I understand Inyo's position on it, but it appears to me that that's a pretty one-sided look at it and approach to it. And so I don't know if that... For the board in general, for the GSP, for the basin, we need to look at it from the big perspective. Is it beneficial to what we're doing? Is it still an option? Is it still possible? So I haven't heard that's not. So I guess I'm uncomfortable with taking that out of the picture.
My thoughts. Tell me what you think about this. That is an issue that needs to be discussed. But we're not there right now. I don't believe that we're at that point for having that mandate that conversation.
But are we
at the
risking,
time.
are we cutting it off, you know?
Well, that's for you guys to decide.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the way I look at it is that going on top of what the chairman just mentioned is that at this point in time, we don't have commitments from AVEC or LADWP to do a project with us. So I think we have to be careful about how we word this letter to the federal government about what we're planning on doing. So I think I agree that I'm not at the point yet to completely always take LAWP off the table, but I think at this point in time, I don't know how honest it is to tell the federal government that, you know, because we don't have any commitments from either as a partner. So I'd agree with you. I'm not there yet either to take it all the way off. I think it's something we have to continue to discuss and figure out. But at this point in time, we don't have any commitments.
Okay.
My opinion is if you take it off, you take both of them off and word in such a way that we still get our placeholder.
Okay. So let's go back just to the formality of doing this right. John, is your motion stand, or are you willing to adjust it to accommodate, or how do you want to do this? It's your motion.
So just to be clear about my motion, I am okay with taking out both projects, assuming and getting the input from Capital Corps that would be, the letter would still be effective in its request. If it needs a project to be specifically identified, even if it's a conceptual project, my motion is to only allow that to be the AVEC project and to not allow that to be the LADWP project. And the reason for that, of course, is our position on the issue in general, but also because the AVEC project has numbers that are greater than the LADWP project. So it's not like we're missing out on potential, hey, we need this money message. So that's my motion, and that's what I'm asking for.
And your original motion also included removing reference to unfunded mandates.
Correct.
I can second that.
The problem I have is going on record that that's off. I agree with Director Gleason and Director Heyman that I don't believe it's entirely off till we look at the benefit cost analysis of all these projects. Because to me, it always boils down to money. What is the most cost efficient way to do what we need to accomplish? And I hate to take something off the table not knowing that answer. So in my opinion, by accepting the motion like it is, like it was exactly stated, that we're committing as you know, we're codifying through this motion that there's no LADWP.
Well, let me ask this question of council. Do we need a motion and vote from the board, or is it sufficient that each member of the board has made comments regarding its desires or directions of what this letter should say?
From what I've seen here so far with this letter, I don't know that a motion is necessarily required by law. It's more what your board would like to do. I would mention one thing, though, in what you're going forward here that hasn't been said. From a standpoint, if the dollars were the same, I would always suggest going AVEC, because AVEC has more potential surface sources to feed to you that you could buy from. And that's why I think there is some maybe value. And then you add on top of that, it's the more expensive one, and you're asking for money. So sending a letter out with AVEC that maybe makes brief reference to a pipeline that we can see from a freeway is a good idea. But I guess to really answer your questions, what do you want to do?
Since the letter is being signed by the chairman, would we be satisfied with letting the chairman just, you know, make that decision? It's letters by you. You know, and based on Capital Corps' recommendation, I agree with you, though, that if we take one out, we take both out, and we just talk about a pipeline project or a project to bring water here.
Okay. John, how about this? How about we sign the letter out, make no mention either north or south, and if a project has to be identified in the letter, we come back to the board for further discussion.
I'm okay with that.
Is that your motion?
I'll make that my motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, let's move on.
Just to be clear, that motion also included the unfunded mandate language.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Okay, I don't have my glasses. Here we go. Number 11, General Manager Report.
It'll be very brief. Just two things. The financial report, which is in your packet. I do want to point out that only the invoices that were received before the packet went out are included in here. We do have, as you can see, $83,900, so we can pay a couple of those invoices, including the most recent one from Stetson. We still need to defer the invoice from Stetson for $183,000 until such time as we get funding in. And I think your board is aware, we did have a little bit of a mix-up. We got a loan, per se, from the brackish water study. There's a little honest mistake made when a check was received. We were so focused on GA expenses, we deposited that into the county account. So we paid invoices out of that. So when the reimbursement for invoice number 3 does come through, we will need to reimburse that brackish study $163,784.56.
Okay, fine. Public, any thoughts? General manager report. Did you do both items?
One more thing. Oh,
you want to do well registration or?
Yeah. Real quick question on the financial report. I know on the consent calendar we only approved 2 expenditures. The latest Stetson invoice and reimbursing the water district for a couple of web-related expenses for the year. There wasn't the typical invoice from Mr. Markman's firm, or in the past we've had invoices from DRI. So there were invoices submitted. They weren't approved to forward to us to put them on the agenda. They were still in the review process. Okay.
That's why they weren't on the agenda to approve.
So it's not that Mr. Markman did no work that month. It's just that those invoices aren't ready for presentation to us yet.
Correct. They will be on there for next month.
Okay. Thank you.
Real quick, if there's nothing else on the well registration, an update. Really not too much to update. Since the ordinance was passed, we have 85 new de minimis registrations and 4 new non-de minimis. The totals to date are 111 non-de minimis and 106 de minimis. So a total of 217 wells registered.
Thank you, sir. Any members from the public wish to comment on number 11, General Manager's report? Mr. Neal.
That's Mike Neal. I was informed during the break that someone who registered their well was told that they did not. It would be fined $25 a month, I believe, or something like that. Does that ordinance have specified fines in it for people who are not registered?
It does not. It does not. I'm not sure where that.
Oh, it does not?
No.
I don't know if the lady's still here. She is. I don't know if she wishes to speak up on this, but that's what I was informed. So I don't know who. There's some kind of civil fine, as I recall, vaguely mentioned, but nothing specific. And so I don't. Are they just not dealing with that at the moment? Just kind of leaving people alone if they don't register?
There's no statutory guide for us to find them right now. There could be other potential problems that would come up if you're a user that does not register your well, but there's no fine right now.
All right. Interesting.
I just want to know, under unpaid invoices, is the brackish water thing supposed to be listed under there? Because you said it's not paid yet.
No, what will happen there is when the reimbursement from Department of Water Resources comes through for the 3rd invoice submittal, there will be a check cut from the county to the Indian Wells Valley Water District, which is managing the brackish water project, in that amount that to reimburse the brackish study for that. That's a payback.
Is that part of that Indian Wells Valley?
No, it's just moving money from one account to the other.
Oh, okay.
There was just a mistake in where they deposited the money.
Okay.
As I said, we were so excited to get a check from DWR, we assumed it was for the for the Groundwater Authority.
Okay.
And we appreciate
and Stetson is appreciative.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other public comments? Thank you. We don't need to vote for that, right? So let's move on to closing comments. Start from the left. From my left.
None.
Goodness. Everyone's being quiet, huh? Well, I can't. I'm going to reiterate what was said earlier. I think that this is the culmination of many, many hours and hard work from not just this board, this staff, the PAC and the TAC, but the public in general. I believe you received some like 800-plus comments. Is that correct, Mr. Johnson? You know, and so it shows how hard the public is engaging in this. And this is sort of a momentous occasion. We have a plan. We've been working on it for years now, and we're there. So like Director Gleason said, and you've already seen some touch of what type of work we're going to have to do when it comes to projects and things. We have a lot more work to do. So I want to, again, thank everybody.
Yeah, just real quick, wanted to congratulate Mr. Hoffman for his recent promotion to shareholder. I'm assuming that means partner. Wow. Okay. So, yeah. And if we contributed to you showing your worth to your firm, we appreciate that.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it. Okay, that wraps things up, and we are adjourned. We got a plan.